or the last session for Saturday group regarding this ruminant management course. So I'll brief what we did last time, right? Just give me a minute so I can show that to you. Right? So I think you can see the screen now regarding what we kind of discussed last time. So this is the course uh, or the module under the category A3, ruminant management, right? So last week we discussed about identification of different breeds of cattle, buffalo, goat, and sheep, and what is a ruminant animal, right? So what are the basic characteristic behind, just to kind of classify as a kind of an animal, as a ruminant animal, and how it is kind of a different from non-ruminant animal, right? So what are the basic differences, characteristics, right? So we already discussed those factors or kind of information last week, and we just started about the dairy cattle management aspects, right? Because we discussed goat management, sheep management. Management means not the management aspects, but the basic, the stuff related to different breeds of goats and sheep, and what are their basics, housing requirements, right? So how we are going to kind of differentiate or identify, right? Those two breeds with buffalo breeds and the dairy cattle breeds, right? So that's we discussed last time, and we had kind of a brief introduction to management of dairy cattle, basically the newborn calf, weaning, and calf management aspects and heifer management aspects, right? So I will briefly go through them again, specifically the dairy cattle management, just to get the kind of a specific background for today's lecture. And then we will be discussing about the breeding, pregnant and lactating cow management, dry cow management aspects, and what are the diseases and the housing for these dairy cattle, right? So that's what I kind of wanted to cover today under your course module, right? Right. Okay. So today we will start with this dairy cattle management. This is the basic what we already discussed maybe during the first few slides, and then we will go ahead with the available other kind of information, right? Right. So we already kind of discuss what is the importance of dairy cattle for our kind of economy as well as for the other countries, right? So we already kind of had brief discussion even during our first module, right? So when we had kind of a basic introduction to the livestock and poultry management in our country as well as in other countries. So we had kind of a brief introduction about the dairy cattle, right? So when we kind of discuss about dairy cattle, right? Last time also we kind of had small kind of a introductory session, right? So we have to have kind of a basic essentials for these animals, right? So basically they should have kind of a comfort environment, some kind of a leisurely environment, which means stress-free, right? And there shouldn't be any fear of predators or any kind of a strange encroaching to the houses or the locations where they are living, right? And we should be able to kind of provide some exercise for these animals, right? So we have to provide a very good health, and just to kind of have good health and just to have kind of a exercise, right? The daily routine exercise program, right? Which means it will assure, right? They are kind of a welfare plus kind of a balanced body conditions, right? We will be discussing what is a kind of a balanced body condition. In addition, when we kind of do some management regarding dairy cattle or even buffaloes or even goats and sheep, right? What we have to do is we have to have kind of a daily routine practices in correct order. For an example, maybe we start with maybe around 6 a.m. in the morning, right? So then we start with the cleaning, right? So then we start with the kind of a feeding the animals, right? Or then we start with the kind of a milking practices or get the body weight or checking their health, right? And let them kind of walk around for maybe half an hour, 1 hour in the kind of outside of their housing systems, right? And then they take them back again to the houses where they are living, right? Or maybe then in the evening again, maybe we feed them, right? And then we take them for the milking purposes again, right? Then again take them back or something like a kind of a routine practices in correct order. Then these animals are kind of a really adaptable, right? Very kind of a supportive animals that you already discussed about who are these basic dairy cattle in exhaustic ones, Frisians, Jersey, Ayrshire, right? Even the Indian breeds like Tarpaka, Sahiwal, right? Like a Sindhi, right? So those things, even the buffaloes, right? Nili Ravi, right? So we already discussed about those breeds, and those breeds are kind of a highly supportive animal if you kind of train them into a kind of a correct order or kind of a daily routine practices, right? So then they know, okay, this is the next step. Okay, this is the next step. So they are kind of already trained and well easy to manage them in this kind of an operation, right? So these are the basic kind of essentials that we have to kind of provide just to kind of assure, right? The basic comfort, right? The leisure, the exercise, and eventually kind of train them into a kind of a correct order of practice, right? Then we already discussed these things, but just to kind of refresh your memories, right? So I will briefly go through them again. So then you can kind of get some idea, right? What we already discussed and what we are going to discuss in the next few hours, right? So why we want to kind of manage a dairy calf, right? Dairy calf la කියලා කියන්නේ ඉපදිච්ච ගමන් සහ එතන ඉඳලා මාස කිහිපයක් යනකම් අපි තමයි calf ලා කියලා හඳුන්වන්නේ. සති කිහිපයක් යනකම් සමහර රටවල්, right? So what we want to do, right? Because the dairy cows are really important because they are the replacement herd, maybe within few months of a time, right? But dairy calf ලා තමයි අද ඉපදෙන කට්ටිය. තව මාස කිහිපයකින් ඒගොල්ලෝ තමයි ඊළඟට breed කරලා කිරි දෙන්න පටන් ගන්න ප්‍රධාන සත්තු ටික වෙන්නේ, right? So therefore we want to have kind of a very good healthy cow in the future, right? In addition, we want to have kind of a animal, right? Very good body capacity because they should be able to kind of consume lots of roughages, right? We already discussed what are the basic differences between these two monogastric and ruminant animals. So these animals tend to eat lots of roughages or dry forages, right? And they are kind of a less efficient animal in terms of converting whatever the feed that they consume into whatever the kind of a usable output, which means about 20%, right? 80% is lost most of the time. And also we need to have a kind of have a long living cow, right? Maybe not 1, 2, 3 years. Maybe we want them maybe at least 5 to 6 years without any issues, all right? Then the next target is whatever the calf is born today, right? Should be able to give birth to a calf maybe within the 2 years of age, right? අවුරුදු එකහමාරෙන් විතර අපි මේගොල්ලෝ breed කරනවා, right? Okay, so within 1.5 years of time, maybe 18 months onward, right? We breed them. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මාස 18 විතර පස්සේ අපිව breed කරන්න ගන්න පුළුවන් මේ සත්තු, right? Once they bred them, right? Maybe within next 10 months or so, we should be able to get the first calf, right? So therefore, the total age of this calf would be maybe about 2, maybe 2.5 years maximum to get the very first calf, right? අද ඉපදෙන සතෙක්ගේ තව අවුරුදු දෙකක් හෝ නැත්නම් දෙකමාරකදී යා පළවෙනි calf බිහි කරන්න ඕන. So what happens, right? If we cannot do that one, we will be discussing later, right? එහෙම නොවුනොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ කියන එක අපි ඉස්සරහට කතා කරලා බලමු, right? So if we kind of do these management in proper way, right? What are the basic benefits a farmer can receive, right? Basically, they can reduce the mortality. Mortality කියලා කියන්නේ මැරෙන සත්තු ප්‍රමාණය, right? So they can reduce the mortality because if we are kind of maintaining a very good, healthy calves within the farm or herd of a calf, right? So we should be able to kind of reduce the mortality rate because less diseases, less issues, right? So very easily we can manage them. So therefore, it will kind of a very good benefit for the farm management, right? Then we can increase the kind of a weaning weight of these animals, right? Weaning means අපි කිරි වරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ. So we should be able to have kind of a very good growth at the time of weaning or when we are cutting down the milk volume that we usually offer for these animals, right? අපි මේ සත්තුන්ට දෙන කිරි ප්‍රමාණය නවත්තනකොට මේ සත්තු හොඳ body weight එකකට අහුවෙලා ඉන්න ඕන. එතකොට තමයි අපිට ෂුවර් කරන්න පුළුවන් සත්තු කරදරයක් නැතුව ඉස්සරහට survive වෙයි කියලා. Then we can get kind of a additional income, right? If we have very good proper management, if we have extra animals there, right? What we can do is we can sell them, right? Maybe we need only 50 cows or maybe kind of a herd for future replacement. හිතන්න අපිට 100යි අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ අපිට මේක ඉස්සරහට මේ manage කරගෙන යන්න කියලා 100 හැරෙන්නද 50යි. නමුත් අපිට දැන් 75ක්ම ඉන්නවා. ඒතර අපේ over capacity තියෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ over outnumber එකක් ඉන්නවා. අපිට අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ නැහැ. එහෙනම් we can sell them. Or even the male animals, right? We can sell male animals. So if there are any undesirable, maybe these bird or kind of animals are not productive. Maybe they have some defects. So what we can do is we can sell them, right? And also we can have a kind of a very good replacement stock. right? ඒ කියන්නේ ඊළඟට දැන් හිතන්න මේ පරම්පරාවේ කිරි දෙන එක අඩු වේගන යනකොට අපි දන්නවා අපිට ඉන්න බෑකප් එක. ඒ කියන්නේ ඊළඟට එන්න ඉන්න සෙට් එක හොඳින් ප්‍රොඩියුස් කරනවා මිල්ක් ඒකින්ද අපිට කිසි ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපේ ෆාම් එකේ ප්‍රොඩක්ටිවිටි එක මේ තියෙන ලෙවල් එකක even we can increase to the next level based on the performances of the replacement stock, right? So then what happens if we kind of manage them in proper way? Right. අපි දැන් ඉස්සෙල්ලා කතා කරේ proper විදිහට අපි ඒගොල්ලෝ manage කරලා මොනවද අපිට හම් වෙන වාසිය කියලා improperly managed or poor management. What happens? Yes, of course they will be susceptible for lots of diseases, right? There will be lots of diseases. Maybe at the beginning of their life, they will be having several diseases. For an example, sometimes diarrhea, right? Coccidiosis, right? Or maybe any kind of a respiratory issues, right? Breathing difficulties, right? So those kind of things may arise time to time for these animals, right? So what happens if we do not manage them in a proper way? They will be highly susceptible for diseases, right? In addition, what is our main target body growth rate, right? In general, we are expecting about 600 to 800 grams per day growth rate in most of the time, at least 500. Just imagine at least 500 grams of body growth per day. But if we do not achieve that particular growth rate, so we cannot target a particular body weight in the future because there should be kind of a minimum or standard body weight achieved at the end of a particular time for the breeding purposes of these animals, right? Some cases they use the age. Some cases they use the body weight just for their performances, right? So if they kind of properly or improperly manage, right? So what happens is they will not be able to achieve the normal growth rate. In addition, as a result, what happens? The breeding practices, right? And we will be seeing some infertility issues, right? So delayed breeding, right? It will take, because our, as I mentioned, our main target, yes, of course, within 2.5 years of time, we should be able to get the first calf of these young animals, right? මේ සත්තු වැඩිලා අවුරුදු දෙක දෙකමාරකට අපිට පුළුවන් වෙන්න ඕනේ පළවෙනි පැටිය ගන්න. But unfortunately, if we do not manage that properly, what happens? Eventually, the breeding age, only whatever the targeted age that we are expecting the first calf will be delayed, or it is going far away from the standard expected dates. In addition, there will be some infertility issues as well, right? So, what are the kind of important aspects of calf management? So, we already discussed these things, just to kind of refresh, right? As soon as they are born, what we have to do is we have to take care of them, right? Because these are newborn calves, so they do not have any kind of exposure to the outside environment until they are born, right? So we have to kind of take care of them. We have to feed them, we have to wean them. So then we have to manage them after weaning, maybe from 3 months to maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months in some cases, if they need any special care. So we have to take care of them. So we already discussed this one, what we are practicing as soon as they are born, right? What they usually do, we have to clean them, or we let the kind of mother dam to clean the animal, right? Or what we do is we just take the responsibility and we clean them. We have to remove all the membranes and whatever the things stuck in the nostrils, ears, eyes, right? Or covering the body, right? We have to clean them. Then we have to ensure they are breathing. ඒගොල්ලෝ හුස්ම ගන්නවා කියන එක අපිට ensure කරන්න වෙනවා, assure කරන්න. Right? So what we can do is we can just check their respiratory kind of areas that we can access through the nostrils or maybe even through the mouth, right? Then remove whatever the materials or matter kind of stuck within that kind of a system. Then we cut the umbilical cord or the navel cord, and then we have to tie it, right? Then we apply some iodine solution just to disinfect, right? Just to kind of avoid any kind of infection over there. Maybe time to time, maybe once in 12 hours of a time, we have to apply some iodine solution just to kind of assure it is kind of a very clean, dry location or place, right? Then we add some kind of oil. We usually add the margosa oil, right? This is kind of a fly repellent, right? Like a fly repellent එකක්. ඒ repellent එක නිසා ගොඩක් අර මේ insects ලා එහෙම නැත්නම් පොඩි සත්තු මැස්සෝ වගේ උන් එන්නේ නැහැ. ඒතකොට අර disease bow වෙන්න තියෙන chance එක අඩු වෙනවා, right? And if we do not manage, as I mentioned, we can let the cow to kind of manage the calf just to support the cleaning processes, right? So then what we have to do is, if it is kind of a environment, we need to kind of assure extra protection, maybe from the wind, maybe from the rain, maybe from the snow, right? Or maybe hot climate or weather. So we have to provide adequate protection, providing some warmth or maybe covering, right? Or bedding materials, right? So we have to kind of provide those supportive kind of facilitation, right? Just to assure these young animals are receiving the best comfort they can receive, right? So then, as we discussed last time, we were kind of discussing about what were the kind of basic things we should do after cleaning and all those practices. So we have to assure these are getting the colostrum. That is the first milk that we take from the mothers, right? Mother cows then අපි ගන්න පළවෙනි milk එක තමයි colostrum කියලා කියන්නේ. So either we can direct the young ones just to go to mom and start drinking milk, or what we can do is, right, we can milk the colostrum, or we can harvest the colostrum from the mom and provide separately through kind of a bottle to these young animals. So either way is okay. අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට එක එක විදිහට practice කරනවා, right? එක්කෝ අම්මගෙන් බොන්න දෙනවා. නමුත් අම්මගෙන් බොන්න දෙනකොට අපිට assure කරන්න බෑ මෙයා liters දෙකක්ද හතරක්ද පහක්ද හයක්ද බිව්වේ කියලා. Because they should be able to kind of receive at least 10% of their birth weight as colostrum. ඒ කියන්නේ කිලෝ 40ක වගේ සතෙන් නම් අනිවාර්යෙන් කිලෝ 4ක්. එහෙම නැත්නම් ලීටර් 4ක් ආසන්න වශයෙන් මේ සතා කොලෙස්ටරෝල් ගන්න ඕනේ within first 12 hours of their life, right? So even though we just let the calf to go and lick from the mom's udder, there will be some issues, right? Sometimes there will be some issues with milk letdown, milking, or colostrum formation. So what we usually do is we feed them through a bottle. අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාට ගන්නේ අම්මගේ harvest කරලා අරගෙන බොටල් එකේ feed කරනවා. ඒ අම්මගේ කොලෙස්ටරෝල් හරියට හැදිලා නැත්නම් ගොඩක් වෙලාට අපි කරන්නේ වෙන එක්කෙනෙක්ගේ කොලෙස්ටරෝල් ටිකක් හරි අපි
අන්මියුට් දැම්ම හරි.
මේ රීෆ්‍රිජරේට් කරලා තියෙන හරි කොහේ හරි ස්ටෝර් කරලා තියෙන කොලෙස්ටරෝල් හරි අරගෙන මේ සත්තුන්ට
සත්‍ය හරි.
අපි
පරිමාඩු කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
feed
හරි.
කරනවා.
පරිමාඩු. හරි හරි. විනාශ වලින් තියන්නද? හරි. කියලා පොත
Right? So that's what we basically do as soon as they are born, right? The colostrum breeding, so we already discussed. So that is the very first milk coming through these animals, right? So because the colostrum contain lots of antibodies or maybe some other nutritions, right? Or whatever the substances which are really essential for the survival and the growth of these animals, we have to provide this colostrum to these animals, right? So thus these animals can build up whatever the resistance against any kind of a diseases at the initial stage of their lives. Right? It contains lots of antibodies and vitamins like vitamin A, riboflavin, choline, right? And then minerals like copper, iron, magnesium, and also they are very easily digestible. Since they are kind of a very young animals, and if you can remember last week we were discussing about their digestive system is not well developed to just to consume the rough materials or whatever the things, because rumen, reticulum, and omasum are not well developed as soon as they are born, right? So it take maybe 5-6 months to develop to a kind of a certain shape and size just to facilitate, right? So whatever the feed consumption, which are basically originated from any grasses, plants, or whatever the rough wages, right? Therefore, just to kind of facilitate easy digestion, and also there will be some materials which are kind of stuck within the digestive system of these newborn animals, even in humans, right? අපි ඉපදෙනකොට නම් අපේ digestive system එක ලොකුවට function වෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ. මොකද අපි අම්මගෙන් තනිකරම defend වෙන්නේ ඔක්කොම nutrient සම්බන්ධයෙන්. එතකොට ඒ nutrient නැති නිසා ගොඩක් වෙලාට ඒක ඇතුලේ පොඩි පොඩි දේවල් ඉතුරු වෙලා තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඔය cells වර්ග, dead වෙච්ච cells මොන හරි එකතු වෙච්ච කොටස්, right? So we call it kind of a material, so that can be very easily expelled, right? ඒක කෙලින්ම එළියට එන්න පුළුවන් colostrum නිසා, because colostrum is kind of having a laxative effect. Laxative means kind of create a condition like diarrhea. මුල් වෙලාව එක බිව්වහම ටික diarrhea වගේ පොඩි condition එකක් ඇති කරනවා මේ colostrum වලින්. මොකද ඒතර colostrum එකත් එක්කම nutrient provide කරනවා, plus digestive system එක initially cleanse කරලා clean කරන්න ඒක help කරනවා, right? This is just to give you some idea what is the kind of composition of colostrum, so we can just compare it, right? So as soon as they are born, right? So mother's colostrum, you can see the composition, right? In general scenario, right? In general conditions, what we drink, අපි ගොඩක් ලාඩ ඔය බොන කිරි තියෙන කඩෙන් ගන්න කිරි හරි එහෙම නැත්නම් ඔය කිරි පිටි වලට අපි විදිහට ගන්න හැමදේම ගත්තට පස්සේ ඒව සාමාන්‍යයෙන් on average it contain about 87% of water, plus 13 or maybe about 12.5% of solid, right? So that's what contained in milk. But as you can see over here, at birth, if you harvest the milk, which is the colostrum from the mom, right? So the water content is about 66%, which means lots of fats contain, proteins, milk sugar, and minerals. They are kind of containing in high volumes, right? You can see the fat content means almost about 7%, protein almost about 24%, right? Minerals is almost about 1.5%, right? So which contain higher volume of content of proteins, fat, and minerals, right? That is just to kind of support the newborn calf. That's why the normal milk, which contain higher volume of water, right? Less amount of solid. But here, less water, but it contain higher content of almost about 35%, right? Solid. Here it is about 13% maximum. So then what we usually do, as we discussed last time, so we have to kind of direct them, or we have to feed colostrum as soon as possible, at least within first 2 hours. It is recommended, if it is recommended, it is kind of highly beneficial if we can provide colostrum within first half an hour, right? සාමාන්‍ය සතා ඉපදිලා පැය භාගයකින් දෙන්න පුළුවන් නම් වඩා වැදගත්, right? Right? So if we can provide colostrum as soon as they are born, it is very kind of a beneficial for the animal or the young one. But unfortunately, it will take maybe more than half an hour because we have to clean the animal. We have to assure the young one is kind of in good health condition, right? So then it will take at least 1 hour just to start feeding colostrum. But there are some efficient managements or farm managements. They try to feed the animals maybe within first half an hour with colostrum. Right? So then what the best option is, if we can possible, at least we have to provide 2 times of colostrum within first 12 hours of their lives. At least 4 liters, right? So then it will kind of provide a very good benefit for these young animals, because after 24 hours of kind of a time period, the main benefits coming from whatever the antibodies or whatever the kind of other nutrients, right, will not be efficiently absorbed to these animals, because then the digestive tract, the small intestine and the nearby sections of the digestive system is not kind of supportive in absorbing those antibodies into the body of these animals, right? මොකද අපි කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය පැය 24ක් වගේ වෙනකොට අපි ඉපදෙනකොට හැම සතෙක්ගේම digestive system එකේ පොඩි පොඩි සිදුරු තියෙනවා. සිදුරු කියලා කියන්නේ ලොකු අර අපි කියන්නේ මේ හිල් කියන එක නෙමෙයි. පොඩි සිදුරු තියෙනවා. ඒ සිදුරු easily open වෙනවා එන ඕනම දෙයකට ඒ වෙලාවේ digestive system එක හරි. ඒක disease වලින් එන බැක්ටීරියා වෛරස් එකක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. අපි ගන්න නියුට්‍රියන්ට් එකක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. antibodies තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, යකඩ වගේ manganese, magnesium වගේ අර minerals වර්ග තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ හැම දෙයකම open without any restrictions, no any barrier. So that's the main benefit of the digestive system during the first 24 hours of their life, even for humans, right? So that's why whatever we consume during that particular time period will be easily absorbed into our body. So that's why it is kind of found that there is no benefit of providing colostrum after 24 hours of their lives. But still, most of the farms, they are kind of providing, right? And the colostrum may be for several days, but it is not, it is kind of essential, because there is no any particular benefit of providing colostrum maybe after 24 to 36 hours of a time, because it's already kind of a completely closed digestive system. So then start kind of a selective absorption. ඊට පස්සේ වෙන්නේ digestive system එක select කරලා තමයි absorb කරන්නේ. We call it kind of a selective absorption of nutrients into our body or animal body, right? So then what we usually do is we have to assure the amount of colostrum received these animals. But the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there are some issues, right? Maybe the cow, the mother animal, can die during the parturition process, right? They are marriageable. Or maybe some issues with milk letdown, right? Which means, as I mentioned, අපි කියන සතාගේ තනබුරුල් හර අඩ එක හරහා කිරීම එකේ මොකක්ද ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන්නේ. Maybe some diseases like mastitis, right? So therefore, what happens is we have to look for another animal. අපි කියන foster animal කෙනෙක් to just to obtain the colostrum, or maybe the whatever the colostrum stored in the farm or the refrigerator or the freezer. So what we have to do is we have to depend on those kind of whatever the available colostrum in the farm, which are not coming from the original mother. Or what we can do is we can prepare an artificial colostrum just to feed these animals. So we have to add some cow milk, maybe egg white, lime water, several oils, right, as ingredients, and antibiotics and clean water, and we mix it and prepare kind of a artificial colostrum, which is pretty kind of a similar to the composition of the natural colostrum, and the kind of benefits which can be kind of obtained, which are pretty similar to the natural colostrum. But unfortunately, in some cases, which is not 100% equal in kind of a composition in some cases, because the colostrum quality may be unique to the mom or the dam or the mother animal. දැන් හිතන්න සමහර විට අම්මා කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා නැත්නම් එළදෙනක් ඉන්නවා ඒ එළදෙනගේ කොලස්ට්‍රම් කියලා. ඒතර මේ තියෙන ඉන්ග්‍රීඩියන්ට්ස් වලින් එන ක්වොලිටි එක මේක තමයි බේසික් නියුට්‍රියන්ට් ක්වොලිටි එක. කොලස්ට්‍රම් වල තියෙන බේසික් නියුට්‍රියන්ට්ස් අපිට දෙන්න පුළුවන්. සමහරලාට ඒ අම්මගේ අනන්‍ය වෙච්ච යුනික් වෙච්ච පොඩි පොඩි ඇන්ටිබොඩීස් එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒ අම්මට ඉස්සර ලෙඩක් හැදිලා තිබුණා නැත්නම් යාගේ පරම්පරාවෙන් එන මොනවා හරි ස්පෙસિෆික් රෙසිස්ටන්ස් එකක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ ඔක්කොම ඇන්ටිබොඩීස් ඒ වගේ තියෙන හැම කැරක්ටරිස්ටික්ස් අපිට දෙන්න බෑ. So this is just the kind of a basic composition, not the kind of a original, which is very kind of 100% similar to the mom's colostrum. So that's the basic disadvantage of using artificial colostrum. But at least it is better have anything, nothing in the farm. නැතුවට නමුත් මේක හරි දෙන්න පුළුවන් නම් වැදගත්. නැත්තම් සත්තු අසරණතාවයට පත් වෙන නිසා, right? So then the milk feeding, right? So we already discussed that one. Maybe after 2 or 3 days, because in general, maybe 2-3 days they are feeding colostrum. Then what we usually do is we will be feeding the whole milk. So whatever the milk, the fresh milk, right? So it depends. The volume will be depend on the farm management decisions, but in general, at least we have to provide maybe 4 liters of milk per day. අඩුම ගාන ලීටර් 4ක් දවසට දෙන්න වෙනවා. In the mornings maybe 2 liters, in the evening maybe 2 liters. So that's the basic kind of a guideline just to feed these animals, right? But there are some kind of a new kind of a practices as well. Sometimes they are feeding very high volume of milk, maybe during the first few weeks of their lives, like maybe 9 liters of milk per day, which means about 4.5 liters of milk during one feeding, or maybe if they are feeding 3 times per day, 3 liters of milk at each time, right? So what we kind of what we have to assure is maybe about 8 to 10% of milk, right, from their normal body weight has to be fed as the minimum requirement of these nutrients for these animals, right? After kind of several weeks of time, maybe mostly 2, 3, but it is recommended to offer maybe within first week of their lives, but most of the time maybe after 4 weeks on average, right? They usually introduce, right, some solid feed materials for these animals, sometimes concentrates, right, pellets විදියට වගේ, and in some cases hay, or kind of a mixture of grasses, hay, some concentrates, right, to these animals, just to kind of use or kind of familiarize these animals with whatever the nutrients they will be consuming in the future life, right? මේ සතුට use කරනවා. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ කිරි බිව්වට මේ දවස්වල තව ටික දවසකින් සතියකින් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, මාසෙකින් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, මාස 2-3කින් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. ඔයගොල්ලෝ consume කරන්නේ මෙන්න මේ වගේ කෑම තමයි ඉස්සරහට කියන එක, just to kind of train them, right? And also the same time it will provide some kind of a stimulation to development of the rumen, reticulum and omasum of these animals. මොකද මම අර කිව්වනේ අර ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ rumen reticulum හරියට හැදිලා නැහැ කියලා initial age එකේදී මතක ඇති. එතකොට ඒකත් stimulate කරන්න පුළුවන් මේ සතුන්ට චුට්ට චුට්ට මේ වගේ solid materials ඒ kind of introduce කරන්න පටන් ගත්තට පස්සේ, right? So when we feed these animals with milk, right, there are several ways, right? One is called natural feeding. Natural feeding means we let the animals to be with the mom, right? We can let the young animals to be with the mom, but the thing is, right, it is not kind of, as I mentioned previously, we cannot assure these animals are getting the minimum requirement of milk during a particular day from their mom. Sometimes they will be kind of drinking a lesser volume of milk, sometimes higher volume of milk, which is more than the requirement for these animals, right? It can happen, right? But that is the very easiest way, less labor intensive. We can let the animal to be with their mom and let the animal to consume whatever the milk with the mom, right? So that's the kind of a way we are doing the natural feeding. But thing is, when we harvest the milk, we have to assure just to leave some milk in the udder, which can be consumed or drink by the young animal. Right? So that's what we have to do. We have to assure that. ඒ අම්මටගේ කිරි ටික අපි 100%ම harvest කරලා ගන්නෙ නෑ, milk කරලා ගන්නෑ. පොඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් ඉතුරු කරනවා මෙයාට අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ එයාගේ පැටියට බොන්න chance එකක් එන්න. Right? So what are the disadvantages? So that we kind of discuss a little earlier, right? We do not know what is the exact production of milk, right, from the mother cow, because we will not be harvesting the whole volume of milk from the mother cow. So that's the first thing, right? And we have to leave some milk just to consume by the young cow, right? In addition, the cow-calf bond, ඒ අම්මයි පැටිය අතර තියෙන bond එක, it will be more strong as long as we are letting them to be together, right? අපි ඒ දෙන්නට එකට ඉන්න දෙන chance එක වැඩි වෙන්න ඒ දෙන්න අතර තියෙන connection එක ගොඩාක් වැඩි වෙනවා, right? That is not a good thing, right? Yes, of course, somebody might be thinking, okay, in terms of what you call animal welfare, or maybe kind of a being kind of a mankind or human nature is to be with whatever the relatives together, like mom and their kids together, right? But our main target is just to kind of have a profitable economical farm, right? And also we want to harvest as much as milk, right, from the mom, right? And we have to assure at the same time the young one is getting the optimum level of nutrients, right? However, once we let them to be together, what happens is they will be bonding strongly, right? Then how strongly bond, right? And when they are kind of having that kind of a strong friendship or relationship, right, mom and the kid, right? The next step is they will not be showing the heat signs for the next level of production or whatever the insemination or the next level of what you call the breeding process, right? The පැටිය හම්බෙලා පැටිය අම්මා එක තිබුණ ගොඩක් වෙලාට ඒ අම්මගෙන් එන heat signs. ඒ කියන්නේ ආයෙ ඊළඟ පැටිය හදන්න පුළුවන් breeding stage එකට එන්න පුළුවන් කියන conditions ටික ටික අඩු වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. මොකද එයා ගොඩක් වෙලා try කරන්නේ එයාගේ පැටියව survive කරගන්න, save කරගන්න, අලුතෙන් පැටියෙක් හදන්න නෙමෙයි. එතකොට ඒ දෙන එකට ඉන්නේ බොන්ඩ් එක වැඩි වෙනවා. එතකොට පුළුවන් තරම් අර characteristic ඒ අම්මා තව පැටියෙක් හදන්න තියෙන chance එක ටික ටික අඩු වෙලා එයා අර පැටියත් එක්ක bonding වෙන chance එකක් පටන් ගන්නවා. ඒ වගේ level එකකට යන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. So we should kind of avoid that kind of a situation, because this is a farm basically targeting on milk production or whatever the targeted income during a particular time or a particular year. So that's why we have to kind of a natural feeding, right? Artificial feeding, as you can see, what we usually do is we first harvest all the milk from the mom and we kind of divide that into kind of specific portions. This is for the selling purposes. This is for the calf or the young one, which means based on the body weight, 8 to 10% of milk will be kind of provided for these animals through these buckets or maybe through the bottles, right? මේ වගේ buckets වලින් provide කරන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් bottle එකකින් provide කරන්න පුළුවන්. This is more effective and more efficient because we know the young ones are getting a particular volume of milk during the period. With their mom, we do not know the amount that they are usually consume. අම්මත් එක්කිනොට අපි දන්නා එයා කොච්චර බොනවද, වැඩියෙන් බිව්වද, අඩුවෙන් බිව්වද, but here no, we know this one. We know the volume that we offer and we know the volume that is kind of a leftover. So the difference is the amount that they consume. හිතන්න අපි පැටියට දෙනවා ලීටර් 4ක්. ලීටර් 3.5ක් මේ බීලා තිනවා මිලිලීටර් 500ක් ඉතුරු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒතකොට අපි ඇත්තටම දන්නවා මේ සතා 3.5ක්ම බිව්වා කියලා. right දවසකට. නමුත් අර අම්මත් එක්ක කියනකොට අපි දන්නේ නැහැ. කොච්චරක් බිව්වද, කොච්චරක් බොන්න බැරි වුණාද, සමහර දවස්වල බැරි බොන්න පුළුවන්, සමහර දවස්වල අඩුවෙන් බොන්නත් පුළුවන්. right? So that's why we kind of provide this, practice this artificial breeding, right? At the same time, we can determine the total volume of milk produced by the mom or the amount of milk consumed by the young animals, right? In addition, as I mentioned, the relationship or the bond with the mom and the young one kind of a very low, not that, right? So then we can easily kind of wean them. අපිට ඒගොල්ලෝ ලේසියෙම කිරි වරන්න පුළුවන් ඒ වගේ අවස්ථාවක් ආවට පස්සේ. නැත්තම් වෙන්නේ කිරි වරණ එකත් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So what are the disadvantages under those circumstances, right? Which is very labor intensive, right? Individually we have to feed the young animals, right? So it is very labor intensive, and sometimes what happens is the issues with the digestive system. So if they are drinking milk from their mom, right, the milk temperature is the body temperature of their mom. අපි දැන් අම්මගෙම කිරි බොනවා නම් අම්මාගේ කිරි වලින් එන අම්මගේ බොඩි එක 37යි නැත්නම් 38යි කියලා. ඒ ආසන්න සමාන පැටිය බොන. But when separately, what we usually do is harvest them, right? First thing. So then we the milk in the normal or maybe even in the refrigerator for some time. So then the temperature will go down maybe to the room temperature, not the body temperature of their mom or the young one, right? So then milk will be a little bit cold, and then once we offer that milk, it can create some digestive disorders, some diarrhea or kind of a loose feces coming out from their digestive system. So those things can be occurred. So therefore what we have to do is we have to kind of heat it up, pasteurized, right? The milk before offering to these young animals, right? Sometimes the contaminations may be too much because we are handling milk using lots of utensils, baskets and buckets, and the milk is lots of contamination. We are not clean them properly. Clean කරන්න නැතුව improper විදිහට manage කරොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Full contaminate වෙලා diarrhea වගේ conditions වෙන්න පුළුවන්. The next one is when we want to do kind of a milking, right? Right? So what happens is when the animal is sucking from their mom, there will be kind of a stimulus. There will be kind of a special stimulus coming through their body, which is called suckling stimulus. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ සත්තුන්ගෙන් අම්මාගෙන් ඒ සත්තු කිරි බොනකොට පොඩි reaction එකක් නැත්නම් reflection එකක් එනවා පොඩි signal එක. එතකොට වෙන්නේ අර ඔයගොල්ලන්ට මතක නැහැ. If you can remember last time we were talking about in general what happens is this is drinking milk. We have to kind of slightly towards upward. Right? Otherwise what happens is the milk will directly, right? The milk will directly enter into the rumen, not going to the abomasum, but the rumen is not well developed. So we already discussed that, right? However, when we are kind of doing some artificial kind of feeding using a bottle or bucket, what happens is that bypassing, that stimulus will not be there to the optimum level. අපි artificially දෙනකොට ඒක එච්චරම හොඳින් හැදෙන්නේ නැහැ ඒ reflection එක, right? එතකොට මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ? esophagus එක හරහා ගිහිල්ලා සමහර විට which will direct them into the rumen as we discussed last time. Then the rumen is not well developed. There is no microorganisms to the optimum level. the shape, the size, the function is not up to the best level so far, right? What happens? They will be kind of start to kind of a degrade in the rumen, and it will create some adverse conditions, right? අපි කියන්නේ කිරි නිකන් පල් වෙනවා කියලා ඒක ඩයිජෙස්ට් වෙන්න අති දිහන්නේ නැහැ, මයික්‍රෝවෙසප්ස් ලන්නේ නැහැ, rumen එකේ වගේ කිරි හැම ලොකුව ඩයිජෙස්ට් වෙන්නෙත් නැහැ, right? So those kind of issues can be resulted because of this kind of artificial feeding, right? So therefore we have to kind of consider those factors very carefully, whether we are going with the natural feeding or artificial feeding, right? Then, as we discussed, we have to introduce roughages or the concentrates as soon as possible. Because if we can wean them very easily or very earlier, we can save some volume of milk. And we can sell that volume to the consumers and get some money. Right? But if we kind of practice just to offer milk for a longer time period, for an example, 5-6 months of a time, so we have to kind of lose some volume of milk because that is basically dedicated for the young ones. We cannot sell them, right? But if we can stop providing milk as soon as possible, right? In the world, they have found that maybe even within 4 weeks of time. සාමාන්‍ය මාසෙක විතර වගේ කාලෙක ඉඳලා කිරි දෙන එක නවත්තන්න පුළුවන් මේ සත්තුන්ව හරියට මැනේජ් කරොත්, right? Even I did some research, right? Several research with young dairy cows, right? Even I was able to kind of wean them maybe within 6 to 7 weeks of age, even less than 2 months of age, right? අපි සති 5න් පටන් ගෙන wean කරන්න සති 6 7 වෙනකොට completely wean කරලා අයින් කරන්න සමහර research මම කරපුවත් පුළුවන් වුණා, right? So which means in general they are going for maybe 3 months, 12 weeks, right? Sometimes 16 weeks. Right? Even more than that in some cases, like in our country, they are still going for maybe 3-4 months without weaning and only providing milk for these animals because these animals are not up to the standard growth and not being able to consume roughages and whatever the other feeds provided other than milk, right? But if we can wean them at least by 6 weeks or maybe at least 2 months of age, right? What we can do is we can save a significant volume of milk and we can sell them and earn some money, right? Therefore, those things has to be kind of considered when we are kind of managing a dairy calf, right? Then the weaning, right? So what we are going to do during the weaning කියලා අපි කියන්නේ කිරි වරනවා කියන, which means stop giving milk for these animals. කිරි දෙන එක නවත්තන්න, right? So there are several methods how we can wean an animal, a dairy calf, right? Dairy calf එක wean කරන්න එක එක ක්‍රම තියෙනවා. Some people in some countries, some farms, they kind of think or wait until the birth weight of these animals get doubled. සමහර කට්ටිය බලන්න මෙයාගේ birth weight එක double වෙනවා. So once they receive their kind of body weight, which is twice the size of their birth weight, so then they wean the animal. එක level එක. සමහර කට්ටිය මාස කිතන්න ඉපදෙනකොට එයාගේ බර කිලෝ 40යි කියලා. හරි. එයා කිලෝ 80 වෙනකන් ඉන්නවා. එයාව wean කරන්න. වෙන කිසිම fact එකක් බලන්න. They just only think about, okay, we are waiting until they are reach a body weight which is twice the size or the weight of their birth weight. So that's one way, right? The other way, some people just stay until they are reach a certain age, regardless of their body weight. They are waiting until a certain age. That's what practicing even in other countries and even in our country, right? Okay, we will be weaning them by 12 weeks of age. 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, regardless of their body weight. සමහරවිට ඒගොල්ලෝ body weight එක ගැන හිතන්නේ. හරි. මෙයාලා සති 12ක් තමයි අපි wean කරන්නේ. age එක බලන්න. බර නෙමෙයි age එක. right? නෑ අපි මෙහෙම බලන්න. There are some the basic standard method, right? Those are also acceptable method, but the modern recommended or recent recommended standard method is we should wait until they are kind of consuming concentrate or any rough material, right? Roughage, like TMR ration or whatever, the hay, grasses or whatever, about 1 kilogram or 2 to 3 consecutive days. හිතන්න දැන් සතෙක් ඉන්නවා. ඒ සතා කිරි බොනවා තාම. නමුත් ඒ සතා කිරි බොන ගමන් ඒගොල්ලෝ කෑම කන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. අර අපි කිව්ව මේ concentrates වර්ග සාන්ද්‍රාහාර, එහෙම නැත්නම් roughages, dry matters, they are consumed, right? And we kind of measure their intakes. අපි එතකොට කරන්න ඕනේ මේවා intakes අපි measure කරන්න ඕනේ. Maybe daily or maybe at least once in 2 days of a time. Right? Then we wait until they kind of consume at least 1 kilogram of particular feed for 2 to 3 consecutive days. හිතන්න දැන් සතෙක් කිරි බිබී ඉන්නවා. සතාගේ වයස තාම සති 5යි කියලා හිතන්න. එතකොට සති 5යි දැන් ටික ටික අපි බලනවා එයා කොච්චර දවසකට රෆේජස් කනවා. කන්සන්ට්‍රේට් සාන්ද්‍රාහාර කොච්චර කනවද? සති 6 වගේ වෙනකොට ඒ සතා ඔන්න කිලෝ එකක් විතර කනවා. ෆ්‍රෙෂ් weight එකෙන් කිලෝ එකක් විතර මෙයා දැන් කනවා. ඊට පස්සේ බලනකොට දවස් 2-3ක්ම එයා කිලෝ එක කනවා. Yeah, still drinking milk, right? But just consume at the same time concentrate 1 kilogram at least for 2 to 3 consecutive days. එක දිගට දවස් අද කනවා, හෙටත් කනවා, අනිද්දාත් කනවා. කිලෝ එක කනවා. සමහර කිලෝ එකකට වඩා චුට්ටක් වැඩි වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, ඊටත් වඩා වැඩි වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. But at least 1 kg. Okay. Then that is the recommendation. Okay, so just observe their intakes and wait until consuming at least 1 kg of these feeds concentrate for 2 to 3 consecutive days. So then we just keep the age and the weight. We just depend only on their feed intake or the dry matter intake. So then it can be maybe 4 weeks of age, 6 weeks of age, or maybe sometime 12 weeks, 6 months, you never know. So as soon as you see these animals are consuming a kind of a particular targeted amount of these concentrate, what you do is you just stop giving milk for these animals. අන්න ඒක දැක්ක ගාම අපි කරන්නේ කෙලින්ම කිරි දෙන එක නවත්තනවා. ආයි චුට්ටක් බලන් ඉන්න. අපි දන්නවා දවස් 3ක් විතර මේ සතා එක දිගට කිලෝ එක නැත්නම් කිලෝ එකට වැඩියෙන් කාලා තියෙනවා. එක ළඟ දවස් 3ක. එදා ඉඳලා කිරි දෙන එක නවත්තනවා 3 වෙනි දවසෙන් පස්සේ. Right. So that's the basic recommendation. So but still some people are wait for the body weight, doubling of their birth weight, or reaching to a certain age just to kind of wean the animal from the milk consumption, right? So then the housing. So we have to discuss about the housing systems for the young ones and the adult ones, right? So when we kind of discuss about the housing systems for these animals, there is no any kind of a standard way because it depends on the weather condition in some cases, right? In some countries, they have winter season, means they have hot season like a summer, fall, spring, winter. So based on those kind of climate, so we have to kind of manage their housing systems in proper way, just to kind of adhere to whatever the weather conditions, right? In some cases, we can provide the individual pets for these animals, right? මේගොල්ලන්ට අපිට individually දෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? All the animals are provided with individual pets, right? Only one animal is kind of kept in one particular pen, right? Or a cage, right? So very easily we can observe these animals, right? And also less chance of getting some diseases like contagious diseases. අපි කියන්නේ එක සතෙකුගෙන් තව සතෙකුට බෝ වෙන්න පුළුවන් diseases තියෙන. ඒ diseases ගන්න පුළුවන් chance එක ගොඩාක් අඩුයි. මොකද ඒගොල්ලෝ individually ඉන්නේ, right? And what we have to do is we have to maintain a very kind of a clean place with very good bedding materials for these animals, right? And we have to provide separate buckets or separate ways of getting water and feeds to these animals, right? It should be available all the time, right? වතුර හැමතිස්සෙම තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒකට අපිට වතුර buckets වෙනම දෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට පස්සේ මේ roughages කියන්නේ concentrate ආහාර ඒවා වෙනම දෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒතකොට ඒක නිසා වෙන වෙනම buckets අපිට දෙන්න වෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ so we should have kind of a minimum floor space, right? At least 1.2 by 1.2 meters in space, we have to kind of provide a minimum space. Such kind of a thing is like this, right? So these animals are in individual cages, right? So this is the calf, right? So there are two buckets provided for these animals. One is with the water, one is with concentrate. අපි කියන්නේ සාන්ද්‍රාහාර කියලා. එක bucket එක සාන්ද්‍රාහාර දාලා දෙනවා. අනිත් bucket එකට වතුර දාලා දෙනවා. So these should be available all the time for these animals, right? No any restrictions, specifically water. වතුර නම් කොහොමත් restrict කරන්න බෑ. ඒක මේ condition එක water should be available as soon as they are born. මේ වතුර අනිවාර්යයෙන් එතන ඉපදිච්ච දවසේ ඉඳලම තියෙනවා. ඉපදිච්ච දවසේ maybe පැයකට විතර පස්සේ ඉඳලා දිගට වතුර දෙන්න ඕන. Right? So that is one of the requirements. Maybe within 2-3 days of a time, we can start providing some concentrate. මේවට concentrate ආහාර. සාන්ද්‍ර ආහාර දවස් 2-3කට පස්සේ ඉඳලා දිගටම ලබා දෙන්න ඕනේ. So this is how kind of an individual pen looks like. So they are separately kept in individual cages and provide a very good bedding material and no kind of a contamination touch with the other animal. අනිත් සතත් කිසිම touch එකක් නැහැ. ඒ සත්තු වෙන වෙනම in individually, so we can easily observe them for their health, growth, or any other kind of parameters, right? Other one is group housing system. So group housing systems, what we usually do is we usually keep maybe 6 to 8 animals in one particular area, right? So, but we have to have kind of assure they are getting kind of a minimum floor space per animal, right? And also we should have provide a very good bedding and also kind of a well-drained soil or floor, right? We have to check for those things every day. And if the bedding materials is not up to the standard, what we have to do is we have to clean it and add new type of a bedding material, right? Then we have to provide the water and feeds, right? There are several places, troughs, right? So we have to use those things just to provide the water and the feeds for these animals. Something like this is one way of providing milk for these animals because they are in large groups, right? Minimum 8 to 10 animals or 6 to this kind of a container with these nipples, right? So then they start kind of a drinking milk, water, and those kind of things has to be provided in this manner. So then the housing capacity of the number of pens required for these animals, right? So it depends on the farm, right? So number of cows are born during particular year, particular time period, so we can decide it, right? අපිට කොච්චර pens ඕනේද කියන එක අපිට decide කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඉන්න ප්‍රමාණය අනුව. අපි හිතාගෙන ඉන්න expect කරන number එක අනුව අපිට හිතා ගන්නවා කොච්චර houses ප්‍රමාණයක්, pens ප්‍රමාණයක් මේ සත්තුන්ට ඕනේද කියන එක. Right? මේවා තමයි farm එකට ඕනේද කියන එක. Right? So these things we already discussed, but I will just briefly show them again, right? What are the methods or what are the practices as soon as they are born, right? We have to provide some identification methods, right? Ear tagging, notching, tattooing, or we can use some photographs, right? This is kind of a ear tagging. So we already discussed last time what are the methods that we practice for these animals as soon as they are born, right? Just to identify the animals, we can practice several methods. So this is kind of a one method or very popular, but it's still expensive method, which is called ear tagging, right? This is ear notching, right? Ear notching means we are using a ear notcher, right? We notch the ears of these animals, right? Like this, right? So this is very popular among what you call pigs most of the time, swine, but even in cattle, they are practicing in some cases. So they have given a particular number to the notch, right? If it is on the left side or if it is on the right side of the face or the right ear, right? They have kind of a given specific number to that particular place, right? So this is number 10, this is number 30, this is 50, right? This is number 531, something like that. So they have given a particular number, right? This is here tattooing. This is the tattooing machine. So we already discussed that one and I showed that to you, right? So this is one way of providing kind of a identification method for these animals, right? Then we discuss about the dehorning process, right? Dehorning means we have to remove the horn or the horn bud, right? So you will be using different type of methods for that one, but more popular way is using kind of a hot iron bar, right? And then just kind of a burn the earbud, right? So once we burn that one, very easily it can be removed. The cells can be removed, and it can be a kind of a rudimentary status, right? So we will not be seeing any kind of a growth of horn after properly practicing this method, which is called dehorning, or even we say sometimes debudding. Debudding කියලා කියන්නේ අර horn bud එක වගේ පොඩ්ඩක් මුලින් අර ඉපදිච්ච ගාම තියෙනවනේ horn එකක් හැදෙන්න පුළුවන් පොඩි bud එකක්. ඒ bud එක කපලා අයින් කිරීමක් තමයි එතනදි කරන්නේ. Right? So then the heifers, right? Once they are weaned, right? The female animals, so they kind of stop consuming milk, right? And then we are calling them as heifers, right? We already kind of briefly discussed this one as well. So they are called heifers. So they are no longer drinking any milk. They are just consuming some concentrates or rough materials, right? So this is very important stage because these are the one within next few months are becoming mothers, right? මේගොල්ලෝ තමා තව මාස කිහිපයක් ඇතුළත අම්මලා වෙන්න පටන් ගන්න. නැත්නම් mother cow කෙනෙක් වෙන්න පටන් ගන්න, right? So therefore we have to take care of them very carefully, even though they are not giving any kind of a benefits within kind of their shorter period of their life. They are not giving any specific benefits, right? මොකද දැන් මේ කාලේදී ඒගොල්ලෝ කිරි දෙන්නේ නැහැ. කිරි දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. වෙන කිසි benefit එකක් නැහැ. They are just eating, right? Eating and resting. That's all. That's what they are doing. ඒගොල්ලෝ කෑම සහ මේ පැත්තකට ලයින් එක තමයි කරන්නේ. මොකද හැබැයි but still we have to take care of them very carefully because very short period of a time, within next 4-5 months, they will be the milk producing kind of animals or the mothers in the farm, right? So what are the basic objectives? So as we discussed, like when we kind of taking care of these animals, the main thing අත්තු අපේ ෆාම් එකේ අවුරුද්දකට 100ක් උපදිනවා. අවුරුද්දකට 100ක් ඉපදිලා අපි කිරි එහෙම නැත්නම් පැටව හම්බෙන්න ඉන්න කාලේනොට සත්තු 50 නම් ඉන්නේ මොකක් හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. 50% lost, right? No. So therefore we have to kind of assure them they are not going to die because of any reason. So we have to reduce the mortality rate. And they should be reaching their targeted puberty at the age of 12 months, at least, on average, right? Then become pregnant within next 3 to 4 months of time, right? Puberty achieve කරන අවුරුද්දකින් අද ඉඳලා, then within next few months of a time, maybe 4 to 6 months of a time, right? They should be pregnant and giving birth to the young ones at the age of 24 to 30 months of time, which means 2 to 2.5 of a time, years of a time, they should be able to give the birth to the first calf of their life, right? And after giving kind of a birth, within next 2 months, right, or maybe within maximum 3 months of a time, right, they should start or they should be ready for the next breeding process or the next kind of a breeding cycle. So that's the main target. Survive කරගන්න ඕනේ. මාස 12කින් විතර puberty වෙන්න ඕනේ. තව මාස 6කින් විතර වගේ ready වෙන්න ඕනේ breeding වලට, insemination වලට. ඊට පස්සේ තව මාස 10ක් වගේ ඇතුළත පැටිය දෙන්න ඕනේ, එළියට දාන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ අවුරුදු 2කින් 2කමාරක් ඇතුළත පළවෙනි පැටිය බිහි කරන්න ඕනේ. තව මාස 2-3ක් වගේ ඇතුළත ready වෙන්න ඕනේ ඊළඟ පැටිය සඳහා මේ breed වෙන්න. Right? So that's the cycle. So that is kind of a cycle. So they need to be trained and kind of maintained in a healthy manner just to support that kind of a process, right? So what are the things that we usually offer? We can offer roughages, concentrates, right? We are not going to feed them with very expensive materials at this particular time period. ඒක ඊළඟට. මේ සතුන්ට අපි අනවශ්‍ය විදියට කෑම දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. දෙන්නේ ලාභදායි යම් ගුණාත්මක භාවයෙන් යුක්ත වෙච්ච කෑම, right? Otherwise, if we are going to provide very expensive diet, which is useless because they will not be providing any benefit to us other than just kind of consuming feeds and just resting, right? Because they are still the young ones or the heifers, right? Then, during the breeding season, right, we have to check for the heat signs, right? Heat signs means they are ready for the breeding or the conception. ඒ heat signs කියලා කියන්නේ මේගොල්ලෝ දැන් මාස 12න් පස්සේ 18 වගේ කිට්ටු වෙනකොට මේගොල්ලෝ පෙන්වන්න පටන් ගන්නවා heat signs. ඒ කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ දැන් පෙන්වනවා මම දැන් ready, right, for the breeding process, right? So then kind of the farm, the management, right, has to be ready for the breeding process, right? Because it is farmers' kind of a skill and responsibility just to kind of identify the heat signs, right? Heat signs, the animals will be giving some kind of a signals to the people, okay, I am ready now, right? So therefore, the farmer will have to kind of check these animals frequently once they reach a particular age frequently and see whether these animals are ready for the breeding, right? So what are the symptoms or characteristics, not a symptom, symptoms is kind of disease, but this is kind of a characteristics shown by these animals that they are under a particular heat period, right? So what they usually do, they let other animals to be mounted on their bodies, right? ඒගොල්ලෝ let දෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ ඉඩ දෙනවා. අනිත් සත්තුන්ට තමන්ගේ ඇඟ උඩ පිටිපස්සෙන් උඩ පැත්තට නගින්න. Sometimes the animal is trying to mount on other animals. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ඇඟ උඩ නගින්නත් දෙනවා. මෙයා අනිත් අයගේ ඇඟ උඩ නගින්නත් try කරනවා, right? So if you check the vulva outside of the reproductive section, which we can observe outside, අපිට vulva area එක, which is kind of becoming reddish in color, swollen and moist in color, right? And sometimes the watery mucus is kind of hanging from the vulva, right? And they are restless, right? හැමතිස්සෙම නිකන් uncomfortable environment එක වගේ ඉන්නේ. හරිම කලබලකාරී, වැඩි කෑම බීම ගන්නෙත් නැහැ, right? So they are kind of not eating well, right? Frequently urinate, right? Sometimes they kind of start bellowing, kind of giving some sounds, right? And they raise their tail, right? Raise tail, right? And also their milk production will be very low during that particular time period. So that's are the major signs of heats for these animals. So the farmer or the manager will have to kind of be carefully observe these animals, right? And see these signs and start the breeding process, right? So what is the age that we are kind of start breeding, right? So basically, if you can remember, right, they reach the breeding age of puberty within 12 to 14 months of a time, right? But we are not going to use that age just for the breeding process. We are waiting for the third cycle, right? සාමාන්‍ය තුන්වෙනි cycle එක වගේ විතර නිකන් ඉන්නවා. يعني සව අවුරුද්දක් දෙකක් වගේ වරත් අඩුම ගන්න අපි චුට්ටක් බලන් ඉන්නවා. Because we should let them grow enough, right, to be ready for kind of a pregnancy period or kind of a gestation period, right? So what we usually do is, right, we kind of use a kind of a stud bull, right? Right? Or kind of artificial insemination process, you know, AI, right? For this kind of a breeding process, right? So these are the signals, right? You can see sometimes these animals are trying to kind of go to another animal and start to mount on that particular animal, right? Or as animal let other animals to mount on their body, right? So that's the main thing. So you observe this is kind of a heat detection guide, right? ඒගොල්ලෝ heat detection guide එකක් හදලා තිනවා මොනවද තියෙන basic science. As you can see, these were the basic things that we discussed, right? So that is be shown by these animals during that particular time period. So we can observe them, right? They are restless, right? Kind of a tail is raised, urination. Just let them to be mounted on others, right? Mucus discharge, right? So those once you observe these kind of a signs, okay, you know these animals are ready for this particular process. Then you start the breeding process, right? Right? So as I mentioned, why we are not going to do the breeding as we see their first heat cycle? No, because these animals are, even though they are showing kind of a heat sign, the breeding signals, right? But if you breed them at very young age, what happens? Their growth can be affected, right? And they are very difficult in kind of a situation for the calving process, right? And also milk production will go down. Therefore, what we usually do is we wait until they reach 18 months at least, right? Then they are kind of a physiologically mature. That's the age. They are physiologically mature enough to bear this kind of a period or gestation period, right? So in some cases, farmers wait, as we did for the weaning process, a particular kind of a body weight, right? For an example, just imagine, right, a Persian calf, right? A Frisian cow or whatever the one is kind of a particular age, maybe about 500 kilograms, their mature body weight, or maybe 1,000 kilograms, right? අපි හිතමු ඉන්නවා නිකන් Frisian cow කෙනෙක්, heifer කෙනෙක්, right? එයාගේ mature, right? තාම නෑ, but the mature body weight is maybe about 1,000 kilograms, right? So then the farmer calculate the body weight, which is about 70% of their mature body weight. And once they reach that particular body weight, they do the breeding process. ඒගොල්ලෝ කොහොමද කරන්නේ? දැන් අර වීන් කරා වගේ සමහර අය බොඩි වේට් එකක් වෙනකම් බලන් ඉන්නවා, සමහර අය ඒජ් එක වෙනකම් බලන් ඉන්නවා, සමහර අය අර කෑම කන ප්‍රමාණයක ලෙවල් එකකට වෙනකම් බලන් ඉන්නවා. බ්‍රීඩින් වලත් කරන්න පුළුවන් එකක් තමයි. අපි සාමාන්‍ය මාස 12න් 14න් හීට් සයින් එක දැක්කත් අපි යාවල බ්‍රීඩ් කරන්න යන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද ඒගොල්ලෝ ෆිසියොලොජිකලි ඒගොල්ලෝ ග්‍රෝ මදි ඒ ලෙවල් එකට පැටියෙක් දරාගෙන ඉන්නේ. එහෙම කරොත් වෙන්නේ ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ කාවින් ඩිෆිකල්ටි එන්න පුළුවන්, growth එක නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්, milk production එක නැති වෙලා යන්න පුළුවන් වගේ ප්‍රශ්න ගොඩාක් එන්න පුළුවන්, right? ඒක නිසා ගොඩක් වෙලාට කරන්නේ හරි එයාගේ mature body weight එක කිලෝ 1000 නම්, right? එහෙනම් ඒකෙන් 70%ක් reach කරපු age එකට ආවට පස්සේ, right? ඒගොල්ලෝ ගිහිල්ලා ඒ age එකේදී නැත්නම් ඒ body weight එකේදී ඒ සතුන්ව breed කරනවා. So that's how they practice it. Sometimes they reach until a particular age, like 18 months, 20 months, right? Or they reach or they wait until these animals reach about 70% of their mature body weight. ඒගොල්ලෝ mature වුණාට පස්සේ නෝන කිලෝ 1000 න කිලෝ 700ක් වගේ වෙනකන් ඉඳලා ඒකෙදි තීරණය කරනවා දැන් මෙයා හරි මෙයාගේ breeding process එකට enter කරගන්න, right? Then once we are done with all the breeding, whether it is natural breeding or whether it is artificial breeding, right? How we determine whether these animals are already pregnant, right? අපි දැන් artificial breeding එකක් කරා, natural breeding කරලා අපි දැනගන්න බෑ මේ සිත දැන් pregnant වෙලාද නැත්නම් කියලා අපිට එකපාරට කියන්න බෑ, right? Okay, we wait for some time and see these animals are not coming to the estrus, right? අපි දැන් අර අපි humans ලාගේ වගේ pregnant වුණාම එක බාහිර ලක්ෂණයක් තමයි ඒ අදාළ කාන්තාවගේ එහෙම නැත්නම් female animal ගේ menstrual cycle එක වැඩ කරන්නේ නැති වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. ඒතකොට එහෙනම් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් humans ලාගෙන females ලාගෙන every 28 days of a time is start the menstrual cycle. So once we see the menstrual cycle is stopped, okay, then we can suspect. We cannot say, okay, because she is pregnant, that's why her cycle is not working. No, we have to wait. That's the first one, right? So then even that is same for these dairy cows, right? Maybe 18 to 21 days, like දවස් 18ක් 21ක් වගේ තමයි ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ cycle එක තියෙන්නේ. So if they are not coming to the estrus within that particular time period, okay, that is one observation. Then what we can do is we do a specific thing called rectal palpation, right? We put our hand through the rectum, not the reproductive tract, through the digestive system from the back side. අපි යාළගේ anus එක rectum එක අර අත දාලා ඇතුලෙන් අල්ලලා බලනවා යම්කිසි දෙයක් ඇහුවෙනවද කියලා නිකන් what we call, it's like a kind of a solid thing inside the uterus. If it is pregnant, you can feel kind of a rough or tough material. It's kind of a light thing is kind of a staying inside the uterus of these animals. Or we can do ultrasound scanning like we do for the humans, right? Or we can check the progesterone level, right? The progesterone level, and if the progesterone level is high, okay, we can suspect that, okay, she is pregnant, or we can confirm that she is pregnant, right? Then, how we kind of manage such kind of an animal, right? Basically, what we do is we kind of rear them in a kind of a stress-free environment, right? No any outside encroachers, predators, or any other animals are coming into these kind of environment, right? So we have to kind of maintain all the kind of standard requirements for these animals, right? And we have to maintain a proper record, the feed intake, maybe water intake if possible, right? The health records, right? The production record, right? Everything kind of has to be maintained in a proper order, right? So why we manage these kind of a pregnant cow, right? Why? First one is they should be achieving a satisfactory goal, right? මේ පැටව් හැදෙන fetus එක සතාගේ අම්මගේ ඇඟේ ඇතුලේ ඉන්න පැටියා, right? They should achieve a kind of a satisfactory goal, right? And also we have to ensure their memory system, the udder, right, should grow to the standard or the optimum level, which should be able to support the young ones by providing milk or feeds for the young animals, right? And also we want to kind of build up some energy, some reserves, right? Body reserves for these animals, just to facilitate the parturition. අපි කියන්නේ delivery එක facilitate කරන්න ඒ සතන හොඳට ඇඟට energy තියෙන්න එපා. ඒ energy level එක up කරගන්න ඕන. And also we have to eventually facilitate an easy delivery of, or kind of an easy delivering process at the end of the gestation or pregnancy period of these animals. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මේගොල්ලන්ට කියන්නේ gestation period එක කියලා. පැටිය හම්බෙන්න ඉන්න කාලය, right? අපි මනුස්සයන් ගැන humans ලාගෙන කියන්නේ pregnancy period එක. නමුත් in technical terms we use it as kind of a gestation period, right? Delivery කරනකොට අපි කියන්නේ we call it as kind of parturition in these animals, right? So what is the period of gestation for these animals, which is about 280 days. It's like almost 10 months. It's pretty kind of similar to the humans, right? The gestation period, which is about 280 days, right? So if you kind of observe, right, what is the total body weight gain, right, which is about 100 kilograms at least, right? In terms of mother animal or the mother cow, which get maybe about 75 minimum weight gain, and the fetus, the young one is developing inside the body, will be kind of reaching about 25 kilograms in body weight in minimum, right? But it can go up to maybe about 45 kilograms in some cases, right? So as humans, right, even like humans, like the if you kind of divide them into trimesters, right? First trimester, second trimesters, and third trimester, almost 2/3 of growth is happening during the last 3 months, right? Maybe until the 6 months, 7 months, the fetal or the fetus or whatever the embryo, right, is growing inside the mom is about 10 kilograms maximum. But once it reaches to the 7 month, 8 month, 9 month, that's the time it start to grow fast, which is reaching about 35 kilograms in body weight at the end of the gestation period. සාමාන්‍ය කිලෝ 40 වගේ වෙනකන් වැඩි වෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ fetus growth එක 3-2කට වඩා සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ අන්තිම මාස දෙක තුනේ. Right? So the animals, the mother animals should kind of eat lots of feeds, right? Basically the roughages, sometimes concentrate. That is just to kind of, what do you call it? Build up body reserves, right? Specifically during last 2 to 3 weeks of time, we have to provide a very good diet for these animals, right? Just to kind of steam up, kind of build up the body reserves, that is to facilitate the parturition or delivery process of these animals, right? Near parturition or delivery, right? So basically we have to kind of provide a very protective, calmful, peaceful environment with very clean cages, right? We can provide separate pens or separate houses, right? And we have to observe if any kind of a parturition sign or delivery sign. So we can see several signs externally if they are nearing the delivery process, right? So we usually can predict the day of calving, right? Like humans, okay, this is the expected date of delivery. It is not precisely kind of correct, right, all the time, but you can kind of predict it, right? Most of the time we can predict it, right, without any kind of an issue, right? Sometimes we predict based on the size of the fetus or the rate of growth, date of the conception or the kind of a breeding. So we know we can kind of predict based on the breeding calendar, which or when these animals are going to give birth to their young ones, right? අපිට ඒක credit කරන්න පුළුවන් පොඩි calendar එකක් තියෙනවා අපි කියන එකට breeding calendar කියලා, right? So then what are the signs of parturition, or what are the signs that indicates these animals are ready for the delivery now, right? So we kind of started with the breeding and then the management of these pregnant cows, and then what are the signs of parturition, like the signs of heat signs, right? Heat signs වගේ breed කරන්න ready වගේ මොකද්ද deliver කරන්න ready කියලා දැන් අපි දකින ලක්ෂණ, right? So basically we see those signs maybe within 10 to 15 hours before most of the time, but the animal is very matured ones, already given birth to maybe several cows. Within 2-3 hours of a time, we see that these animals are clearly ready for the parturition, right? We can see the udder kind of try to congest. ටිකක් පොඩ්ඩක් තද වෙච්ච අඩ එකක් අපි දකිනවා. පොඩි හිර වෙච්ච ගතියක්, ඝන වෙච්ච, right? So then the pelvic ligaments, right? Around the tail and kind of a pelvis area. අපි කියන්නේ අපි දැන් මේ සතෙක් ගත්තොත් සතාගේ tail එක හරිය. tail එකත් එක්ක තියෙන area එක, right? All the ligaments, right? All the kind of bones and whatever the ligaments attach these bones start relaxing. ඒවා පොඩ්ඩක් relax වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. The tail start to elevate. tail එක ගොඩක් වෙලාවට උඩ පැත්තට හැරලා තියෙනවා, right? Then the vulva area. If you see the outside of this, the vulva, right? You can see the swollen, reddish color vulva. Lots of mucus is discharging from the vulva. Frequently urinate, right? They stop eating. The mother cow stop eating, right? And dilation of the vulva. Vulva area ටික dilate වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. ටිකක් බුරුල් වෙන්න පටන්. And then the restlessness, right? The animals are kind of seeming like stress sometimes, right? They do not eat, they just feel very kind of uncomfortable, right? They just cannot stand, or just trying to sit or sleep, then again stand up within very few minutes, very short period of time, right? and the calf is rotate into their normal delivery position, right? So those are the basic signs of parturition. So වෙලාවට මේ සතා මේ පැටිය එළියට දාන්න වෙන්නේ කියන ලක්ෂණ ටික අපිට පෑ දෙක තුනක ඉඳලා සාමාන්‍යයෙන් හේයිෆ කෙනෙක් නම් first time breed වෙච්ච කෙනෙක් නම් පෑ 10 12ක් වගේ ඉඳලා පෙන්නන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. නැත්නම් ටිකක් මැචුවර් වෙච්ච පැටව දෙන්නෙක් විතර දාපු එකෙන් නම් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් පෑ 6ක් 8ක් වගේ ඇතුළත පෙන්නන්න පටන් ගන්නවා, right? So during the carving process, what happens is they just start dilating the vulva, pelvic region, right? So everything kind of become very kind of dilated, and lots of urination, lots of discharge from the vulva, right? And others starts to become very kind of larger in size, right? Sometimes you can see like an edema, right? So those kind of things can be observed during the carving process, right? So then when it is ready for the carving, what you can see is the uterus, right? Right? So it's begin the contraction process, right? So it's like the support of some hormones, right? So it's like oxytocin. So they just start the contraction process. So giving some kind of signals, right? To further enhance the whatever the parturition signs, the dilations and secretions, right? Everything kind of enhanced or intensified, right? Maybe within 4 hours of time, once you start seeing these signals, signs, you can see a new calf is born, right? Sometimes if some kind of things happens, it may go up to maybe at least 1 day showing these signals. Maybe some issues with the carving with that situations, right? So these are some signals, right? So you can see the udder is kind of enlarged, right? And kind of a mucus is discharged from the vulva. This is the vulva area, right? And it is kind of a swollen and reddish, kind of a reddish in color, right? The vulva area ටිකක් swollen, ඉදිමිලා වගේ තියෙනවා. රතු පාට වගේ වෙලා තියෙනවා. අඩ එක ටිකක් විශාල වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. Mucus එක discharge වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. So these are the basic signs or the signals of parturition, which means within very few hours of a time, she will give birth to the young animal, right? So this is what happens. This is the normal birth position, right? So usually the front leg will come out first, right? So this is the birth position. This is what we call the birth position. The front leg should be coming out of the vagina or the vulva first, and then the head and the rest of the body, right? So this is the normal birth position. As you can see, the head is pointed towards the vulva area. Yeah, right. Check pregnant. So this is the rectum. This is the digestive system, last section. So you put hand from here and bring it over here. This is the birth position now. Our normal position again, never birth position. Head area. Then you can touch it. Clearly touch it through the rectum palpation, and then see whether someone is living inside the body of this mother animal, right? So what happens is lots of powerful contractions will be there inside the uterus, right? So those are kind of involuntary contractions, but same time you can provide some voluntary contraction. You also try to, the animals also try to kind of provide some contractions to the stomach just to support those uterine contractions, right? That is just to kind of push the fetus outside the body of the mother animal, right? So then what happens is the calf's head basically passes through the vulva area, right? So then the water bag, right? So basically what happens is before the start of the carving, the water bag usually coming first out of the body, right? It is kind of filled with kind of a fluid, right? Amniotic fluid, we call it amniotic fluid. So that is the one basically support the dilation and lubrication of the passageway of the calf when you do is the delivery process, right? This is what happens. You can first see the water bag, right? coming out from the mother animal, right? So then the animal is coming with the front leg, right? Normal, this is a normal, right? Normal delivery එකේදී මේව තමයි දකින්න පුළුවන්. But there are some abnormal ways, right? So in that situation, we have to assist the mother cow just to support the birth of the young one, right? But this is a normal birth kind of a practice. You can see this kind of a observation, right? So this is the next step, right? What happens? The front feet, right? Front 2 feet basically appear first. මුලින් ඊට පස්සේ පළවෙනි කකුල් දෙක මුලින් පළවෙනි කියන්නේ ඉස්සරහා තියෙන කකුල් දෙක first come out of the vulva of these animals, right? Then you can see the head is coming out, right? Within one kind of a session, so head is coming out, but still you can see, right? So the udder looks like a enlarged, swollen, and congested, right? මේකනේ අල්ලලා බැලුවොත් මේක soft. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අඩ එකක් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් soft, right? In general, it is in a soft nature, right? But if you touch this one, this is not soft. This is kind of a hard in position because lots of contractions and movements are going inside the body, right? So the animals, all the kind of tissues become a little stiff, right? ටිකක් තද ගතියකට පත් වෙනවා, right? So then within next few minutes, you can see the shoulders and all those things are coming out through the vulva or the vagina of this mother cow, right? Then eventually it will be pushed out the whole calf or entire calf into the outside environment. So then the mother cow start kind of a licking, kind of a cleaning of this mother cow, right? Then there will be some difficulties in calving, right? So what are the basic difficulties in calving, right? So the normal birth position is like this, as I mentioned to you. This is the normal birth position, right? But in some cases, not some, but most of the time, they are not normal, right? In those situations, what we have to do is we have to kind of provide some assistance to the mother cow, right? So what we have to do is first we see the appearance of water bag. So once we see the appearance of water bags through the vulva or the vagina, within next 1-2 hours of a time, they should be able to provide or give the birth to the young one, right? If we do not see the young one is being born, even after 2 hours of seeing the water bag, which means there is a problem, right? සාමාන්‍ය water bag එක ඇවිල්ලා පැය දෙකක් වගේ ඇතුළත පැටිය එළියට එනවා. එහෙම ආවේ නැත්නම් අපිට හිතන්න වෙනවා මොකක් හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇතුලේ තියෙනවා. So then what we have to do is we have to consult a veterinarian if available. If not, there are some well-trained livestock management personnel, right? We have to get the support of this person just to kind of help the mother animal to support this parturition process, right? So in some cases, you might be seeing like this. Yes, of course, head, the front legs are coming first, but head is kind of a down between the legs. It should be like this, right? If you can remember, this is the normal position, right? You can see the normal position over here, but here you can see it is the bent head. So this is one of the issues, right? Maybe like this. So it is not turned into the birth position, right? You can see it's like a normal way that the animal is in a kind of a back is coming or directing towards the vagina or the vulva, right? It is also kind of a abnormal situation. In such kind of a situation, right? Head is there directing towards the what we call the vagina or the vulva, but the front leg, right? They are retained inside the uterus, right? Front leg එක නැමිලා තියෙන අතුල් පැත්තට head එක විතරක් හරියට birth position එකේ තියෙනවා. That is also kind of a abnormal situation. Or maybe like this, head turn back. Head එක අනිත් පැත්තට හැරලා තියෙනවා. කකුල් දෙක විතරක් හරි පැත්තට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. Right? Those are kind of a abnormal situation, right? Or maybe other way, right? Back legs are coming first, right? පිටිපස්සේ කකුල් දෙක එළියට එන වෙලාව. Yes, you can see these kind of situations or abnormal positions if you clearly observe these animals, right? In such situations, we have to help the animal, as I mentioned. So we can use this kind of a rope, right? And then try to kind of tie up the front leg or whatever the legs coming out, right? And then provide some assistance, right? This is also kind of a assistance given by the livestock specialist. In some cases, maybe the fetus is too large. අපි කියන අර හොඳට වැඩිච්ච සතෙක් කියලා අනවශ්‍ය විදිහට වැඩිලා overgrown එක. ඒ මොනොත් මෙයාට අමාරුයි මේක හරහා එළියට එන්න. Right? Under such situations, we have to provide these kind of an assistance, right? You can use these ropes and try to kind of drag it out through the vagina of these animals or the vulva of these animals, right? මෙහෙම වෙච්ච ප්‍රශ්නයක් කඹල් දාලා ගැට ගහලා ඇදලා එළියට ගන්න ඕනේ support එකක් දීලා. Right? You can see that here. These are the front legs, right? So these are the front legs are tied up with ropes and pushing it or pulling it hard as much as you can just to take the young ones out. Otherwise, it will adversely affect on the mother cow as well as stillbirths, right? පැටියෙක් ඉපදෙනකොටම මැරලා තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද හුස්ම ගන්නත් බෑ, මුකුත් කරගන්නත් බෑ. පැටිය හිර වෙලා මේ බර්ත් කැනල් එකේ, right? ඒතකොට මේ වගේ සපෝට් එකක් දුන්නේ නැත්තම් පැය දෙකකට විතර පස්සෙත් දකින්න නැතුව වුණොත් ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් ඊට පස්සේ. Right? So, what are the things to be remembered during assisting, right? What you have to do is we have to kind of use lots of soap, warm water, antiseptic agents just to clean our hands, arms, and whatever the tools that we are using. හැමදේම clean වෙලා තියෙනවා, right? In addition, we have to kind of avoid any injurious situations to the cows, right? These animals, we should avoid any injury. When we use ropes and those kind of things, we should have to be careful. Right? We should not push the animals unnecessarily, providing excess force. That is not good, right? Because it kind of affect on the calf as well as for the mother calf, right? And we have to help the animals as soon as possible, right? We have to take the calf out and help the cow up, right? And then just try to kind of provide or assure the normal kind of conditions for these animals, right? And we have to treat the animals with some antibiotics because there will be some wounds, right? Some stress situations, or rather than kind of a normal delivery of a young calf, right? So as we discuss what we need to do after calving, right? We have to kind of clean these animals, right? And we have to assure the animals is breathing, right? So we have to kind of cut the navel cord, right? We have to treatment with some antibiotic is kind of an essential thing, right? And we have to kind of observe if there are any kind of infection, right? Any kind of abnormal discharge, right? So we have to kind of check for those kind of situations in these settings, right? So those are the basic things we have to kind of consider, right? Okay. So now it is 10:15. What I can do is I will give you kind of a small break, maybe about 15 minutes of a break. And we will see again at 10:15, right? So we will continue the lecture after that. 10 කාලට ආයි 10 කාලයි දැන් වෙලා අපි 10 මාර්ට ආයි හම්බෙමු. හම්බෙලා ආයි ඉතුරු ටික අපි කතා කරගෙන යන්න. So we already discussed a lots of things, and if you have any questions we can discuss after that as well, right? එහෙනම් මම විනාඩි 15කට වගේ පොඩ්ඩක් නවත්තන්න පොඩි break එකකට. අපි ඊට පස්සේ ආයි දිගටම කරගෙන යන්න. Right? Okay.
Recording stopped.
happens after carving? So as we discussed, we have to kind of clean the animal, right? And that is can be done by the mother animal or maybe artificially or what we kind of manually by the farm management, right? So then what happens after carving, which is kind of inside the mother cow, right? So some fluid, right, may contain some blood and some tissues, maybe kind of a retain inside the body of the mother cow, right? Or inside the uterus, right? So this can be kind of expelled coming out from the body of the mother cow within next few days, right? Maybe during first 2-3 days of a time after the carving is completed, the whatever the remaining inside the uterus or maybe inside the tract or the reproductive tract or whatever, so which is kind of expelled to the outside environment, right? So in addition, there will be some kind of infections, specifically the uterine infections, right? So what are the kind of a common uterine infections? You may kind of see or feel kind of a odor of the discharge coming through the kind of a reproductive tract of this kind of a animal, right? In addition, you will see kind of a bloody discharge, right? And sometimes there is no any kind of foul smell, but some secretions and some tissues, right? Those kind of things like will expel from the uterus to the outside environment once the carving is completed within first few days after carving, right? So therefore, what we have to do is we have to treat these animals with some antibiotics to kind of avoid any kind of unnecessary, right, infections or kind of diseases may happen after carving in the mother cows or the mother animals, right? So when we kind of discuss about some diseases, right, of these animals, right, one condition or one situation is called retained placenta. You might be seeing the placenta or associated tissues and those things will not be expelled completely once they are completed with their birth or kind of a carving process, right? So that is called kind of a retained placenta, right? So what happens is, which is kind of a retained, right? But in general, what happens as soon as the calf is born, right? So which is kind of a normally expelled within next few hours or next few days of a time, right? So what happens is basically due to the contractions of the womb or the uterus, right? So those kind of content which is kind of expelled or squeezes out of the body of the animal, right? But what happens is it can be remain or retain inside the cow, sometimes hanging a part of that section like this, right? That is called basically kind of a retained placenta. So under those situations, we have to provide some kind of a help for the animal just to remove that from the body, right? So what we usually do, right? So if it is kind of a hanging from the cow to the kind of a towards the floor, right? So what we can do is we just kind of try to kind of tie up, right? And with kind of a rope or something, right? So then just try to kind of drag it slowly out, but we should not kind of let it kind of hang any kind of a breaks or sticks on it, right? So what happens then? It kind of tend to tear up, right? කොටසක් කැඩලා එළියට එනවා, කොටසක් ඇතුලේ ඉන්න පුළුවන්, right? So basically what we are going to do is with the help of a kind of a trained personnel, a veterinarian or kind of a livestock management training. There are specific training person or trained person. So we should kind of let them know, come and help by manually removing those sections or whatever the remaining so hanging outside in the body of the mother animal, right? The other one is called another condition or the disease is called prolapse uterus. Right? So this is kind of a situation may happen because of a difficult carving process, right? Not like a normal carving process, maybe because of kind of a assisted carving process. Some cases, some difficulties, maybe because animal is having any other condition, or maybe because the calf is kind of a larger than expected, and maybe kind of abnormal birth position, right? So those kind of things may kind of indirectly support this kind of a situation, but the main reason, right, is cow is kind of not lying on the ground level during the calving process. කියන්නේ සතා අර හේතුත් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද අර unnecessary or kind of extra kind of contractions and expelling, or trying kind of spending lots of energy just to expel the fetus or whatever, the calf inside the womb to the outside environment, will provide kind of a unnecessary kind of a contractions and expelling pressure to the uterus and the whatever the reproductive tract of the animal, right? So then it's eventually kind of try to expelling out of the body of the animal, right? So what we have to do is, as soon as we see this kind of a situation, we have to put it back inside to the body of the cow, right? Which is kind of should be in a very sanitary way, without any contaminations. We should be able to put it back as soon as possible as we see this kind of a situation, right? So this is kind of a situation resulting mainly because the mom or the mother cow is not lying on the ground level during the calving, right? In addition to those things like assisted calving, some difficulties in calving, maybe larger size of a calf or whatever the fetus body, right? And unnecessary kind of a contractions, try to expelling whatever contained inside the body of the animal. So this is such kind of a situation, kind of a prolapse uterus, right? So a prolapse uterus is kind of a condition. So we have to put this back into the body of the cow as soon as possible. මේක ඇතුළේ දැන් ඔක හැදිලා තියෙන මේ පැටියා ඉන්නේ මෙන්න මේක ඇතුළේ. Right. හරියට බැලුවා. නමුත් අර unnecessary පැටියා හම්බ වෙනකොට දාන contractions ඊට අමතරව අපි හිතමු මේ try කරනවා අපි එළියට ඇදලා ගන්න එක්ක සතා හිටගෙනම ඉන්නවා පැටියා හම්බ වෙනකොට. ඒතකොට අනවශ්‍ය විදියට අර ground level එකේ ඉන්නේ නැතුව නැගිටලා ඉන්නකොට දෙන අනවශ්‍ය pressure එකක් හින්දා මේ වගේ හේතු වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right. Then how to manage the dry cows, right? Dry cow management, right? So first we will see why we need to practice such kind of a thing. අපි කියන්නේ දැන් කිරි වරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ. කිරි වරනවා කියන්නේ අරක නෙමෙයි අප්පා කියන්නේ. බීන් කරනවා කියන එක නෙමෙයි. මේ වියලි කරනවා කියන මේ සතාව මේ කිරි වරින් නැත්නම් කිරි ගන්න එක නවත්ත. මම සිංහලෙන් හරියට එක්ස්ප්ලেইন කරනවා නම් සතාගෙන් කිරි අපි මේ harvest කරන එක completely නවත්ත. Right? So why we practice such kind of a thing, which is called dry cow management? Why? Right? The first thing is we have to kind of rest the milking kind of organs, right? Other teats and milk secretory kind of whatever the mechanism system should be rested for some time before the cow is giving birth to the young ones, right? In addition, we have to promote the fetus or embryo development rather than focusing on milk production, right? So because this is happening, all these kind of a rapid growth and rapid developments are happening during last few months, right? As we discussed, 2/3 of that kind of particular growth is happening during the last 2 to 3 months of these animals, or the gestation period, right? As we discussed. Therefore, we have kind of assured during that particular time period just to promote the fetus development or the embryo development rather than inducing milk production of these animals, right? That's what we have to do. We have to induce the fetus development. මොකද අපි කියවන 3න් 2ක් සාමාන්‍ය කිලෝ 10න් විතර ඉඳලා පටන්ගෙන කිලෝ 25 කිලෝ 40, right? ඒ වගේ development පටන් ගන්න අන්තිම මාස 3ේදී, right? Trimester එකක් ගත්තොත් දවස් 280ක් ගත්තොත් ওই දවස් 280 අපි වෙන් කරලා ගත්තොත් එහෙම phases 3කට trimester 1, trimester 2 and trimester 3 කියලා. Third trimester එකේ තමයි 2/3 of the growth of the embryo or the fetus can be observed, right? Therefore, we have to rest the organs of milk secretion or the milk production, and we have to promote the fetus development, and also we have to kind of replenish or kind of a recover or restore, right? Body reserves, right? Basically, just to kind of support the animal, conserve some energy before the start or before the starting the process of parturition. ඒ සතාට අපි කාලයක් දෙනවා body reserves ටික වැඩි කරගන්න. In terms of energy, minerals and those kind of things should be kind of restored. කියන්නේ නැවත යථා තත්ත්වයටපත් කරගන්න ඕනේ. මොකද ඒක එයා සතාට එනර්ජි තියෙන්න ඕනේ ඇඟ ඇතුලේ. හරියට මැනේජ් කරගෙන පැටියා ඉපදෙනකොට ඕන කරන එනර්ජි ටිකත් තියාගෙන ඊට අමතරව මිල්ක් ප්‍රොඩක්ෂන් එකට ඊට පස්සේ පැටිය පුරාට පස්සේ රෙඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ. Right? Therefore, those things has to be kind of considered during the dry cow management process. What are the methods of drying off them? Right? අපි කොහොමද මේ සත්තුන්ව dry කරන්නේ? කිරි ගන්න එක නවත්තන්න. So we are not going to kind of practice that is just kind of stop milking very kind of abrupt way in most of the time, but there are some methods, right? First one is called incomplete milking. So okay, generally we completely milk them in a normal day, right? But here time to time, maybe in the mornings we will do only milking, and in the afternoon we are not going to do any milking. Maybe we just skip some days, right? Then do the milking or something, right? Or maybe just kind of trying to kind of let kind of leave more milk inside the udder rather than milking, right? So that's kind of a situation, kind of reduce the production, right, to a few liters of milk per day, right? Then kind of a completely milking is stopped. That is called incomplete milking. Incomplete milking වලදී අපි කරන්නේ මේ ඔක්කොම කිරි ටික අපි අඩ එකෙන් ගන්නෙ නෑ එකපාර, right? ටික ටික ගන්න. උදේට එක සැරයක් කරනවා, ආයෙ ඔන්න අපි ඊළඟ දවසේ හවසට කරනවා, right? ඊට පස්සේ production එක ටික ටික අඩු වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා කිරි ප්‍රමාණයට. මොකද then the body kind of recognize that okay, they are going to kind of drying me off now. So then what I need to do is I have to decrease the milk production inside my body, because I need to kind of ready for the drying off now, and then just start conserving body energy. I do not need to produce milk anymore for a very short period of time. So body understand that one, and then stop producing milk, and then we stop the milking process. Right? So what we can do is milk once a day, maybe for a few days of time. Then every next day, kind of just skip one day, right? And then stop milking completely, right? Then completely we can stop in some cases, right? But that is basically recommended for kind of a low producing animals, right? For an example, cows producing maybe about 10 liters of milk per day, right? So what we usually do is once we kind of reach to the maximum production, so then what happens, the udder pressure, everything reaches to a stage, right? And kind of giving a signal back to the brain and to the other parts of the body saying, okay, they are not going to harvest milk from me now, right? So then what I have to do is I have to kind of stop producing milk, and whatever the milk contained or secreted into the udder, what happens, which will kind of reabsorb into the body of that animal and completely dry the udder, right? We can do intermittent milking. We can just scoop milk for several days, right? Or incomplete milking, or complete cessation. That is basically for the kind of a low producing animal, right? Intermittent, අපි ටික වෙලාවක් milk කරනවා, right? හරි ඉස්සෙල්ලා කරා වගේ. intermittent එකේදී එක දවසක් අද කරනවා, සති දවස් දෙක තුනක් නවත්තලා තිබිලා ආයෙ milk කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ ඕනනම් දවස් දෙකකට මේ කවුද දෙකක් තුනක් අතහැරලා එක දවසක් වගේ කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ ටිකක් milk production අඩු වෙගෙන යනකොට අපි completely stop. Complete cessation it is recommended for the animals, basically for kind of a what we call animals who are producing milk very kind of a low amount of milk, maybe 10 liters of milk per day. We just let kind of a secrete milk and we do not harvest, right? Then body recognize it, reabsorb whatever the milk produce into their body and completely die out. The incomplete milking, right? What we usually do is we just stop harvesting milk completely, right? We kind of milk intermittently, just let them, and once in a day or 2 hours in a day or something like that. And then it reduce the production to kind of a level, and then we stop complete milking. So there are 3 methods, right? Practice in the kind of a what you call industry, right? So then what is the length of the dry period? අපි කොච්චරක් මේගොල්ලන්ව dry කරලා තියෙනවා. Basically it depends, right? But in general we usually recommend to dry them for at least 1 month to 2 to 3 months, right? We can go up to maybe 80 days or maybe 90 days. That is the best time period that we can provide for the animals, just to replenish their body reserves and kind of regain some energy and some minerals and whatever the nutrients and deposit them into the body, right? However, these things depends on the bodily condition. අපි ඒගොල්ලන් කියන්නේ body condition. If the animal's body condition is really good, body condition කියන්නේ හොඳට හැදිච්ච body එකක් තියෙනවා, shape එකක් තියෙනවා, reserves ලස්සනට තියෙන එකක් නම් at least 30 days is enough, right? But if it is more than kind of a worse situation, very thin animal, right? Less energy kind of reserves in the body. Okay, we have to let that animal to kind of a longer period, maybe 2 months, 3 months, just to kind of regain whatever the nutrients and kind of replenish their body reserves, right? Basically, if the body condition is really good, we let them dry for a kind of a shorter period of a time. If it is poor, right? If it is not up to the standard level of body condition, we kind of recommend like a longer dry period, like 2 months or 3 months in some cases, right? So what we usually do during this particular time period, during the dry period, right? First, one of the kind of a common popular disease condition is mastitis, right? Mastitis කියන එක ඔයගොල්ලෝ අහලත් ඇති. mastitis කියන ලෙඩේ හැදෙනවා ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඔය සත්තුන්ට, කිරි දෙන සත්තුන්ට, right? It's kind of a bacterial disease effect, right? So what we can do is we kind of use antibiotics, right? So we kind of treat the teats or the animals with these antibiotics, right? So therefore, during this dry period, right, this is very convenient to the management just to kind of treat or kind of provide some kind of a facilitation or prevention to this kind of a disease, right? So what we usually do is we treat them, right, with different kind of antibiotics and just treat them. And this is very effective because we are not going to milk them. And since we are not going to milk them, it will break the cycle of these bacteria most of the time. මේගොල්ලන්ගේ අර cycle එක break කරනවා. මොකද අපි හැමතිස්සෙම කිරි දොවනවා නම් ඒ කිරි teats වල ඉන්න ඒ බැක්ටීරියා ඉන්ෆෙක්ට් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, ඒගොල්ලෝ ඩැමේජ් කරන්න පුළුවන් chance එක වැඩි. නමුත් අපි කිරි දොවන එක අඩු වෙන්න කිරි නිෂ්පාදනයක් සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැති වෙනකොට මේ අඩ එකේ මේ teats වලයි ඒක හරහා එච්චර usage එකක් වෙන්නේ නැති වුනහම, right? ඒතර අලුතෙන් infections එකක් තියෙන සම්භාවිතාවත් අඩුයි. මොකද ඒ cycle එක break කරනවා. right? ඒ cycle එක break කරන්න පටන් ගත්තට පස්සේ ඉතින් අපිට ලේසි මේවා manage කරගන්න. ඒතර ඊළඟ ආයෙ කිරි දෙන්න පටන් ගන්න මාස 2ක් හරි 3කට හරි පස්සේ. එතකොට ඒ කාලෙ වෙද්දි ඒ සත හරිම refresh අර වගේ බැක්ටීරියා අරගොල්ලෝ කවුරුත් නැහැ. මොකද ඒගොල්ලෝ milking කරලා නැහැ, මොකුත් නැහැ. ඉතින් අර බැක්ටීරියා වලට කිසිම survival එකකුත් නැහැ. එහෙනම් අපි naturally break කරලා තිබ්බහම ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ cycle එක. But we can also provide some antibiotics or any kind of a treatments. Maybe it is not that much effective during the milking season. Milking කරද්දී ඒක එච්චරම අර effective නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. But still they are, we have to treat, we have to isolate them and we have to treat these animals. But the effectiveness may be very less compared to the dry cow therapy. So what we are kind of them as feeds for these animals, right? So basically what happens is during the milking process, right? We are removing lots of nutrients from the animal body. සතාගෙන් ගොඩාක් nutrients අපි එළියට ගන්න, right? So what are we taking them, right? Basically carbohydrate, sugar, basically, right? And proteins, vitamins, minerals, right? Calcium, right? Lots of minerals, vitamins, and other nutrients are taken out of the animal's body, right? However, animals like a mother cow is also require more nutrients. First one is just for the maintenance of their body, right? Just to sustain the life and the health conditions and the production purposes, whether it is gestation period or lactation period or fetus growth. So every time they need more nutrients, right? Therefore, we have kind of fulfill whatever the nutrient requirements of these animals, right? Not only for the maintenance. අපි දැන් හැන්තම හිතන මේ සතාගේ maintenance එකක් විතර මේ අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ. මෙයාට මහලු දෙයක් වෙන ඕන වෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ කියලා හිතන වෙලාවට වෙන්න පුළුවන්. But that is not the case. We have to provide lots of nutrients considering whether she is pregnant. Okay, she is pregnant. Okay, she needs to provide more nutrients just for the maintenance of the animal, just to maintain health, plus fetus growth. Embryo growth එකට අපිට අවශ්‍ය කරන nutrients දෙන්න. In addition, we have to provide the nutrients for the maintenance of the gestation period. Plus, still we are harvesting milk, right? So we have to maintain the production level as well. So we have to consider all these factors, right? And provide the nutrients for these animals, right? So what happens if we are not able to provide optimum or proper level of nutrients for these animals? So they are susceptible to diseases. There will be lots of diseases, right? Malnourishment, right? Some bacterial, viral diseases. They are highly susceptible, right? So those are the basic things, like, so we have to kind of consider when we are feeding a cow, right? So their level of nutrient, what we can do is we can kind of check their body condition score. I will show you what is the body condition score and their production records as well. We can check their production records. Are they high producing animals, low producing animals, average producing animals, right? So based on that, we have to fulfill their nutrient requirements, right? If they are very high producing animals, which means they will be producing at least 50 liters of milk per day, or maybe 40 to 50 liters of milk per day. So during that particular time period, which means lots of nutrients deposited or consumed by these animals are excreted as nutrient or nutrient-rich milk to the outside environment, which means lots of minerals, vitamins, and proteins, carbohydrates, fat are removing from the animal body, and we take it as milk of these animals. Right? Therefore, we have to replenish, right? We have to refill whatever the nutrients are losing from the animal body as final fresh milk. So we have to consider those things. But if we are not going to kind of provide a better nutrients and kind of replenishing whatever the nutrients are taken out of these animals' body, so they will become undernourished. ඒගොල්ලෝ ඊට පස්සේ මන්ද පෝෂණය නැත්නම් malnourished, undernourished. අවශ්‍ය ප්‍රමාණයට අඩු nutrient level එකකින් සත්තු බවට පත් වෙනවා. So we have to check their production records. We have to check their body condition score, whatever the body status, the energy status, or the size of the body, shape of the body, and provide whatever the feeds for these animals. So what is the BCS? BCS එක කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? That's called body condition score. Body condition score, that is called kind of a scale starting from 1 to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's kind of a scale. We can just observe the animals externally, right? And then give them a kind of a number for these animals, right? We usually check their backbones, right? The hip bones, right? The ribs, the shoulders, right? Their tails, their fins, and everything, right? Externally, we can touch them, we can observe them externally, and we give a specific mark for these animals, right? For an example, these are kind of a what do you call it? Scale showing you how to kind of categorize these animals based on the body condition score. So this is the body condition score 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right? So this is the back side of the bone, right? This is the hip bones, right? This is the side, right? Pin bones, right? The tail view, right? The side angle view. You can see it, right? So based on these factors, these observations, right? So this is මේ තියෙන නිකන් අර කොඳු වැට නාරටි එළියට පැනලා. දැක්ක හොඳට පේනවා ඔයගොල්ලෝ. මේක ටිකක් හොඳට හැදිලා තියෙනවා. මේකේ තව ටිකක් වැඩිපුර හැදිලා තියෙනවා. මේක නිකන් අනවශ්‍ය විදිහට හැදිලා දිනවා. මේ කිසිම ෆ්‍රේම් එකක් හරියට දකින්න බෑ. මේක නිකන් කැම දීලා වැඩි. නිකන් ෆැට් වෙලා තනිකර මේ ගෙඩිය වගේ හැදිලා තියෙනවා. You can see it, right? අනිත් සතාගේ මෙන්න මේ ෂේප් එක අපිට දකින්න හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ. මෙන්න මෙතන මේ ෂේප් එකනේ දැන් පිටිපස්සේ බලනකොට මේ තියෙන. ඒතර මෙන්න මේ ටික ෂේප් එක හරියට බලන්න බැරුව නිකන් මේ ඔක්කොම පැට් එක වගේ කව වෙලා තියෙනවා නම් තමයි ඕවර් කන්ඩිෂන් කියන්නේ. It's too much of nutrients, right? So this is the well-balanced situation, right? This is the kind of a well-balanced situation. Everything is well-balanced, right? This is too much or under conditions or too much of, not too much, less amount of nutrients are provided for these animals, right? This is too much. So by looking at these factors, we can give some marks. 1, 2, 3, for these separate sections, right? That is called basically body condition score. This is kind of a situation you can clearly see it, right? Backside you can see this is very weak animal. You can even see you can even count the ribs very clearly, right? Once you reach over here, this is condition over number 3. You cannot clearly see the ribs over here, right? But it is a very kind of a well-shaped body. Right? Here you can see it's too much of fat, too much of muscles, right? Shape is too big, right? So you cannot see even the hip bones, right? Fat is deposited all over. But here, yes, you can slightly see the hip bones, right? Ribs are not visible, general scenario, right? Tail heads are kind of a what do you call well clean and well straight, right? Body outline is very smooth compared to these two scenarios, right? So this is kind of a best level. So we usually observe the animals in the side angle and back angle and see and provide any marks based on these observations, right? That's called the body condition score. Depend on the score that we reserve, right? So we can provide or we can change the type of diet that we offer for these animals. So if the condition score is 5, which means we are providing too much of nutrients for these animals, that is not required, that is unnecessary, right? So we can change the diet or we can reduce or decrease the amount of food or feed offers to these animals. This is also too much, and its body has become kind of a round in shape, and still it is too much of nutrients over condition, right? But here it's very kind of a smooth body line and very clean animal, right? So then this is the best way. Then we will see how we kind of manage the male animals, right? We call them as bulls or stud bulls. That is usually used for the breeding purposes or the other bull animals, right? So if you take kind of a bulls, stud bulls, so basically we are using or keeping them for reproduction purposes, right? So we have to provide a very good feeding, housing, right? The health and general management practices just to kind of maintain a very good kind of a environment for these animals. But at the initial stage, maybe up to 6 months of age, usually they are kept together with the female animals. But after 6 months of a time, because they become sexually mature right after that particular time period, so therefore, for the betterment of these animals, they are just separated by the 6 months of age, right? So how we are going to select a very good bull calf, right? Basically, we select them based on kind of a external appearances and their progeny, their mother, their father. We check all the records, right? Production records and everything, their mother, father, and whatever the kind of conditions they face once they are born, right? මොන තත්ත්වයක්ද ඒගොල්ලෝ ඉපදුනේ හැමතේම බලලා. So health condition and everything, we will kind of select the best bull calves, right? So as I mentioned, we have to kind of check the records, right? අම්මගේ record එක කොහමද, තාත්තගේ record එක කොහමද, right? Dam means the female one, sire, that's the male one, right? Sire means the male one. මේක තමයි පිරිමි සතා, මේ තියෙන ගෑනු සතා dam කෙනෙක් කියලා කියන්නේ. Genetic analysis, so are there any kind of diseases, right? That you observe with previous situations, right? So, for an example, one condition is called brucellosis. Give me a minute. Right. So we have to check all the records, right? The sire's records, dam means the mother, the female one, sire means the male one. So we have to kind of records of all these whatever the available records, just to kind of select the best animal that is used to kind of for the future male or the stud bull, right? The reproduction records and the production records and the genetic analysis, right? So are there any kind of diseases available, right? All these things can be kind of checked and see and then select the best available one, right? So what are the production records of these animals, right? So we can check the weight at the birth of these animals, right? And what are the other basic characteristics of these animals, right? Which means whether they kind of got up as soon as they were born and they just went to their mom and start drinking milk, right? The growth rate after the birth, right? And what is the time they took just to kind of reach their weaning weight or the weaning age, right? Or just the amount of feed that they consume, maybe 1 kilograms of feeds for maybe 2 to 3 consecutive days, right? ඔය වගේ characters අපි බලනවා. ඒ සතා. ඒකෙන් තමයි අපි අර හොඳ සතෙක්ව හරියට තෝරගන්නේ. කොහොමද යාගේ බර? සාමාන්‍ය කිලෝ 40ක්ද 50ක්ද 60ක්ද නැත්නම් 10ද 15ද, right? එහෙම නැත්නම් under weight එකක්ද over weight එකක්ද average body weight එකක්ද, right? In addition, how they get up and kind of just go to their mom and start drinking or colostrum or whatever the milk, right? or then the growth rate after the birth, right? So all these things has to be checked and recorded, and based on those records, we are going to select the best one, right? So then whether they are kind of suitable enough for the kind of breeding process, right? So what are the things that we usually consider, right? So the first one is like we should check their reproductive organs, whether they are having a kind of a proper optimum kind of a size of reproductive organs, right? So we can check their testes, we can just kind of a touch, and we call it as palpation, just kind of squish it and just see whether they are kind of in proper shape, proper size, and whether they are having major kind of ductules, right? ඔයගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා ඇති ඔය සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි දැන් human nutrition වලදී උනත් අපි දන්නවා humans ලා උනත් ගත්තාම testicles හොඳට හැදිලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඊට පස්සේ අර infertility කියන එකනේ ඒකනේ නැත්තම් පිරිමියාගෙන testicles හොඳට තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඊට පස්සේ අර අපි කියන ශුක්‍රාණු ගමන් කරන tubes නාල very well formed වෙලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. අපි කියනවා අර මේ මොකද්ද testicle shape එක size එක right එක හා සමානව හැදිලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඇඟෙන් එළියට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ, right? So all these factors are also checked in these animals, right? That is called testes should descend into the scrotum. අර පොඩි pouch එකක් වගේ අපේ මේ humans ළඟ පිරිමියාගේ ඒ characteristic එක තියෙනවා. testicles තියෙන්නේ body එකෙන් එළියේ, right? පොඩි pouch එකක වගේ පොඩි bag එකක වගේ ඇතුළට වෙලා, right? So that's kind of a practice should be there, right? So if they are inside the body of the animal, so we see, okay, this animal is not kind of a good level or condition for the breeding purposes, right? Why these testicles are outside the body of an animal and in kind of inside of a scrotum. So basically, that is just to kind of support, right? To maintain a temperature lower than the body temperature. මොකද අපේ body temperature එක සාමාන්‍යයෙන් 37ක් විතර. කැටල් කෙනෙක් ගත්තා 38ක් 39ක් විතර වගේ තමයි body temperature එක තියෙන්නේ. ඒතකොට testicles එළියෙන් තියෙන්නේ body එකේ, right? මොකද body temperature වල අඩු temperature එක maintain කරගන්න අවශ්‍ය වෙන නිසා. මොකද testicles වල තියෙන අපි කියන්නේ sperms වලට. අපි කියන ශුක්‍රාණු පිළිම සතාගේ ජාන කොටස් වලට body temperature එක කියන්නේ මේ තියෙන ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි. ඒක දරා ගන්න අමාරුයි. ඊට වඩා අඩු temperature එක තමයි යාව maintain කරගන්න ඕනේ. That's why the scrotum usually support kind of a what you call descending whatever the testicles, so the testes into the scrotum, and then eventually keeping them under lower temperature than the body temperature. Then we usually check the legs and the limbs and all those factors in these animals, right? Then when it's come to the houses, so we should provide kind of a larger space for these animals, right? These things should be well ventilated, should be well covered with the roof, right? We should provide kind of an area just to provide some exercise, just to run around and kind of come back again, right? That is kind of a situation, and which is kind of separated away from other animals and other units, right? These should be kind of isolated, or not kind of isolated, but just away from the other animals, right? They should have kind of a specific attention, specific what do you call specific facilitation, right, for these animals, just to assure some exercise, right, and some space, and away from other animal with less disturbances, right? Then how we are going to handle them, like the cows or the female ones, we have to do some dehorning, right? We have to kind of remove the horns, and it can be mechanical or manual or electrical. We can practice anyway, just to kind of practice this kind of a dehorning or debudding method, right? It should be done as soon as possible within first 10 days of their lives, right? Because it is not that much painful or kind of a more bleeding if we practice this as soon as possible. But if we let it to do maybe after several weeks or several months, what happens, which is kind of even more pain for these animals or more bleeding for these animals, right? So they are kind of very easy to remove at very young stage of their life, right? So why we kind of practice dehorning? We already discussed a little earlier as well. So if we practice dehorning, which will facilitate to handle these animals very easily, right? And also it needs very less space compared to the animals who are having horns, right? ඕගොල්ලෝ හොඳට මතක නම් ඕගොල්ලෝ දැන් ගොඩක් අය මෙතන ගිහිල්ලා ඇති අබේ වෙල නිව්සීලන්ත ෆාම් එකට විසිට් කරලා ඇති. ඒකට ගියාම ඕගොල්ලෝ දැකලා ඇති ගොඩාක් වෙලාට ස්පේස් තියෙන සත්තු, ඒ කියන්නේ ස්පේස් පොඩි ස්පේස් එක සත්තු ලොකු ප්‍රමාණයක් දාලා තියෙනවා. ඒ ඔක්කොම සත්තු ඩීහෝන් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒකම එක තැනක් තියෙනවා. ඔයගොල්ලෝ අර ටිකක් පරණ ෆාම් එකේ උඩ පැත්තට ගියාම ඉන්නවා බුල්ස් ලයින් තැන, right? ලොකු බුල්ස්ලා 3 දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා දැනට. ඒතකොට ඒකේ සාමාන්‍ය එකෙක් ටොන් දෙකක් විතර බර ඇති. කිලෝ 2000ක් විතර බරයි සමහර විට සත්තු. ඒගොල්ලන්ව ඩීහෝනින් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ මොකද ඒ සත්තුන්ව කන්ට්‍රෝල් කරගන්න ලේසි සහ ස්පේස් එක අඩුවෙන් යන්නේ ඩීහෝන් කරලා තිබ්බොත්. රූපයක් ඉදිරි ඉන්නකොට තවත් ලේසි ඩීහෝනින් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒතකොට කෙනෙක් ඇටැක් එක නැත්නම් ෆයිට් එක ගොඩක් වෙලාට අඩු වෙනවා, right? ටච් කරලා රණ්ඩු වෙලා මුකුත් ප්‍රශ්න ඇති කරගන්නේ නැහැ. ගොඩක් වෙලාවට in addition it will need very less space and we can put more animals in one particular space or one particular pen or a room, right? So what are the kind of disadvantages of these dehorning process, right? Basic thing is they will lose kind of an identification or unique characteristic to these breeds or species, right? So basic thing is there are some animals, right, which are identified, right, based on these characteristics. So that is kind of an identification mark for these animals. මේගොල්ලන්ගේ ඔළුවේ තියෙන ඒ අන් දෙකෙන් තමයි ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ යුනික්නස් එක හැදලා තියෙන්නේ. මෙන්න මේ ෂේප් එක, මේ සයිස් එකට, මේ ලෙන්ත් එකට මෙන්න මේ විදිහට තියෙන එක කැරක්ටරිස්ටික් එකක් විදිහට තමයි මේ බ්‍රීඩ් එක වගේ සමහරකට අයිඩෙන්ටිෆයි කරගන්න පුළුවන්. In addition they are less attractive, right? ඒ කියන්නේ සත්තුන්ගේ attractiveness එක horns වලිනුත් yes, of course, it will provide some protection for them just to fight against other animals. But in that scenario, they will be less attractive because their horns are removed, right? So identification mark, yes, so definitely it will lose, and attractiveness also will be decreased. This is just to kind of provide you some idea. So it is kind of a defense or kind of a organ or part of the body which will provide a support to defend from the predators or enemies of these animals, right? ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අන් දෙක පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ ඒ වගේ ක්‍රියාවලියක් සඳහා. Other than that, there is no much of kind of a importance of that is kind of a aesthetic, kind of a unique characteristic and attractiveness plus a protective organ for these animals from the enemies or the predators, right? So what are the feeds? So we have to provide sufficient volume of feed for these animals, right? All these with vitamin A, vitamin E, basically those are antioxidants, right? And we have to provide the minerals, and also we have to provide more kind of nutrients, roughages with some kind of concentrates with average volume or percentage of proteins, as they may need a good nutrient just to support their breeding process. Because during the breeding process, they will be losing lots of energy, right? So therefore, just to support that kind of a process, we need to provide lots of energy to this animal to kind of to be ready any type for breeding process, right? So we have to check these breeding bull time to time. Are there any kind of diseases that can be transmitted through sexual activities, right? And also we have to check their semen qualities, right? And performances before kind of doing the mating process, right? And what are the performances of their children, right? If it is a male, female cow, are they producing well, right? We can check the records and what is the conception rates, right? And are there any abnormalities, any kind of a congenital defects, right? So those kind of things has to be checked all the time, right? And then based on that, we can kind of evaluate the performances of these animals, right? And if there are kind of a, what do you call, any requirement, if any specific requirement, what we can do is, we can do some vaccinations, right? Just to kind of assure they are not getting any kind of a specific disease, right? Just to maintain their health conditions, right? So similar to the the heifers or the calves, right? The ladies ones or the females, right? So they are also becoming kind of sexually mature, maybe at about 10 months, right? But similar to the previous female ones, we are not going to use them for the breeding purposes because that is a kind of a early age for them, right? So similar to the female ones, the best age for the mating or the breeding process, which is starting maybe around 18 months of their age, right? So what we usually do is initially we will use them at least one service කියලා කියන්නේ එක sexual mating එකක් සතියකට, right? For maybe 2 years until they are reaching 2 weeks of age, so 2 years of age, at least one mating for 1 week. So that's the main target, right? But after that, we can go for at least 2 times of services per week, right? For the next kind of a 6 months of a time, and later we can go even higher number of services, right? Per week, and do the kind of a breeding process or plan the breeding process in a particular farm, right? So when it's come to the housing systems for these animals, right? Whether it is a female one or a male one, why we need to provide housing there, right? Which is kind of a mitigation of climatic stress of these animals. Right? අපි දන්නවා අපි වුණත් ගයක් හදාගන්න මොනවාරි හේතු කිහිපයක් තියෙනවා. අපි වුණත් විශේෂයෙන් ගයක් හදන්න ඕනේ. ඇයි ගයක්ම නෙමෙයි. නමුත් අපි කියන්නේ ආරක්ෂාකාරීව ඉන්න පුළුවන් තැන. It can be a kind of a completely newly built house, or maybe a cave or shady place or under tree or whatever, right? But that is just to kind of mitigate or reduce any kind of a stress of climate change, right? Whether it is raining, whether it is snowing, or whether it is kind of a drought or kind of a warm environmental condition. So we have to kind of avoid such kind of a scenario, right? Then we need to kind of control, because of the housing systems, we can control the amount of feed consumed by these animals. The amount of feed can be increased or decreased based on the type of housing systems that we are practicing. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ සත්තු කෑම කන. දැන් අපි ඒගොල්ලෝ ගේක දාලා ඉන්නකොට අපි දන්නවා ඒගොල්ලෝ කොච්චරක් කනවා. මොකද අපි ඒගොල්ලන්ට වෙන වෙනම තනි කූඩුවල අපි දැන් අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා පැටව ගැන කතා කරද්දිත් අපි කතා කරා. පොඩි පැටව ඉන්න තැනක වුණත් අපි දවසකට අම්මත් එක්ක ඉන්නකොට අපි දන්නවා තනියෙන් ඉන්නකොට වෙන් කළ පෙන් එකක නැත්නම් කේජ් එක දාලා තියෙනකොට අපි දන්නවා මේ සතා කොච්චරක්, මොකද අපි දන්නවා උදේට ලීටර් 2ක් දුන්නා, හවස ලීටර් 2ක්. ඊට පස්සේ ඉතුරු වෙලා තියෙනවා කොච්චරක්ද? ඒ දෙක අතර තියෙන වෙනස තමයි මේ සතා බීලා තියෙන්නේ. කෑම උනත් එහෙම. උදේ අපි හිතමු කිලෝ එකක් මැනලා දුන්නා කියලා. ඊට පහුවද අපි මැනලා බලනවා උදේ වෙද්දි කොච්චරක් ඉතුරු වෙලා තියෙනවද. මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස තමයි යන අපි assume කරන්නේ මේ සතා කෑවා කියලා. right? එතකොට අපිට පුළුවන් මේ සතාට ඕන කරන feed ප්‍රමාණය control කරලා දෙන්න based on their requirement. And also we can increase the amount that we are offering, and then they can just kind of consume more and more feed and then increase their feed intake. In addition, we can kind of manage our laborers and our supportive staff in an efficient manner, right? We can save lots of labor, right? And we can make whatever the works available in kind of a convenient manner, right? ඉතින් සත්තු ටික ඔහේ නිදැල්ලේ අපි අතහැරලා දාලා තියෙනවා නම් ඒ සත්තුන්ගෙන් අපිට අවශ්‍ය විදිහට ඒ මැනේජ් කරගන්න ලේබරර්ස් නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද අපිට ගොඩාක් ලේබරර්ස් ලා ඕන වෙන්න පුළුවන් මේ ටැංක් වලට යවන්න, සත්තු එකතු කරගන්න, සත්තු ගැන ඔබ්සර්ව් කරන්න, මේ සත්තු කනවද, ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇති කරගෙනද, ෆයිට් එකක් යනවද මොකක්ද කියලා ඔක්කොම බලා ගන්න අපිට ලේබරර්ස් ලා ගොඩාක් ඕන, right? But when we have housing kind of a system, these animals are in a particular place, particular cage, individually or as a group. So then we know and we can clearly observe these animals, right? Understand these animals, how they behave, how they eat, the type of feed that they consume, when they want to sleep, right? When they are having these heat signs, right? Or even when they have these kind of parturition signs, right? In addition, we can safeguard them from any enemies, right? Enemies, predators, right? Even from the theft, right? Thieves ලකින් ආරක්ෂා කරගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ හැමදේම අපිට දෙන්නේ කරගන්න පුළුවන්. In addition, we can control the diseases, pests and diseases both, right? Because if they are wandering around or going for a free grazing, right, or if they are just walking in the park, right, so what happens? There is a high chance of getting some diseases and some pest attack. So, ticks ලා වෙන්න පුළුවන්, worms ලා වෙන්න පුළුවන්, ඊට අමතරව diseases ලා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ හැම දෙයකම exposure එක වැඩි වෙනවා. Because it is out of control because they are wandering around, right? ඒගොල්ලෝ free grazing වලට ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා. උලාගෙන කන්න හරි කොහේ හරි ගිහිල්ලා රවුම් ගහලා හැමතැනම ගිහිල්ලා එනකොට තියෙන ටිලෙට්‍රිකයි ඔක්කොම ටිකක් අරගෙන එන්න පුළුවන්. But when they are in a kind of a particular housing system, particular location with a demarcated boundary, so they cannot go beyond that. So then we can control the entry and exit point. අපිට පුළුවන් ඒගොල්ලෝ entry වෙන තැන් exit වෙන තැන් control කරන්න. Even the visitors are entering and exit points can be controlled. Everything can be controlled without any serious problem. So then we can control the diseases and pest attack or predator attacks. Everything can be controlled. On the other way, so if the animals are kind of a reared in a system, like an integrated system, අපි ගමු integrate කරලා තියෙන system එකක්, right? අපි ගමු vegetable තියෙනවා, එහෙම නැත්නම් rubber, coconut, එහෙම නැත්නම් tea plantation එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, එක්ක paddy cultivation එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, maize cultivation එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේ මොකක් හරි cultivation එකක් එක්ක තියෙනකොට we can reduce the damage can be caused by these animals to those crops or the plantations as well. Because if the animals are kind of a rearing under a free kind of environmental system, right? Free grazing system එක මේ සත්තුව අපි කියන්නේ මේ manage කරනවා නම් එතකොට ඒ සත්තුන්ගේ මේ crops වලට වෙන්න පුළුවන් damage එක වැඩි වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. But if they are confined into a particular what we call confined into a particular housing system, so they are not going to go to outside environment. They are just staying inside the houses, right? So there will be no any kind of damages to these housing systems, right? So therefore, we can safeguard those crops as well. And then harvesting is easy, right? Harvesting is milking process. So milking process is also kind of a very convenient and very easy because they are inside the housing system. Or we can use the milking machines or milking parlor or manual method just to harvest whatever the what you call products coming out from these animals, right? So when we design a house, right? So what are the factors that we should consider, right? මේ houses ගැන කතා කරද්දී we හදයක් හදද්දිත් එහෙම තමයි. So what are the factors we are usually kind of considering when we are designing a house, right? So basically we have to have kind of a sufficient space for grass cultivation or feed formulation or whatever the feed management. We have to have kind of a sufficient land or a space, right? Water availability, right? Feed availability or feed spaces availability, right? And also sufficient kind of a shading system, right? If we are kind of letting these animals for grazing in the environment. ඔයගොල්ලෝ අඹේවල නිව්සීලන්ත ෆාම් එකට ගියාම ඔයගොල්ලෝ දකිනවා ඒ සත් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඉන්නේ ගෙවල් ඇතුලේ. අර කූඩු ඇතුලේ එහෙම නැත්නම් ෆෙන් එකක් ඇතුලේ තමයි ඉන්නේ. නමුත් සමහරවිට ඔයගොල්ලෝ යන පාරේ දකිනවා අතරපත ඉන්නවා සත්තු රංචු පිටින් එක එක තැන්වල ඉන්නවා. ඒ මොකක්ද ඒගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ? ඒගොල්ලෝ ඒ ඒජ් එක සහ ඒගොල්ලෝ කන්ඩිෂන් එක අනුව ඒ සත්තු දවසකට සමහර වෙලාවල් වලට ඒ සත්තු එළියට යවනවා. ඒ යවනකොට ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැකලා තියෙන්නේ ෆීල්ඩ්ස් වල මැද සමහර තැන්වල ලොකු ගස් තියෙනවා. ඒක කපලා අයින් කරලා නැහැ. right? ඊට අමතරව ඒගොල්ලෝ සමහර තැන්වල පොඩි මඩුවක් වගේ තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. සමහර මේ ලංකාවේ නේද වෙන ෆාම්ස් වල ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැකලා තියෙනවා. දකින්න පුළුවන් ඉන්ටර්නෙට් එකේ ගියාම ඕනතර එහෙම ස්පේසස් දීලා තියෙනවා ෂේඩින් එන්වයරන්මන්ට් එකකුත් එක්ක. ගස් කපලා නැහැ ලොකු ලොකු ගස්. ඒ අතරින් පතර තමයි තනකොළ වල තියෙන්නේ. So that just to kind of assure, right, the sufficient kind of a shading area for these animals when they are grazing in the outside environment, right? So those are the basic factors to be considered, right? Just when we are selecting a method or location or housing system for these animals. So when you observe basic housing system, right, there are different systems available. One is called tie-up housing system, and other one is called loose housing system. දැන් ගොඩක් වෙලාට ඔයගොල්ලෝ observe කරලා බැලුවොත් housing systems වර්ග දෙකක් තියෙනවා මේ සත්තුන්ට. මේ cattle, dairy cattle, right? One is called tie-up. Tie-up means basically cows are kind of kept inside a particular housing system or a store or a pen, right? All the feed, water is provided to the places where they are living, right? Milking can be done in kind of individual manner, or maybe can be kind of a doing in a kind of using a portable milking machine, right? And whatever the manure, fecal matter, urine, which are kind of a basically collected through the drains or whatever the gutters available, right? But there are some disadvantages. What are the disadvantages, right? So they can kind of what do you call damage the teats of other animals. That is one because of the stress kind of a trampling. ඒගොල්ලෝ පා ගන්න පුළුවන් අනිත් සත්තුන්ගේ teats. ඒගොල්ලෝ වඩලා ඉන්නේ බුද්ධියගෙන හරි ඉන්නට පෑගෙන්න පුළුවන්. There will be some issues with the hoops. අපේ නියපොතු වගේ සත්තුන්ගේ නියපොතු. කුර කියලා කියන්නේ කුර හැදෙන. කුර වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා අපේ නියපොතු වගේ තමයි. Right? Time to time we have to cut them off. Right? We call this kind of a hoop trimming. අපි hoop trimming කියලා තමයි ඒකට කියන්නේ. We have to do kind of a hoop trimming, right? But when they are walking, ඒ කියන්නේ ඒගොල්ලෝ ඇවිදිනකොට හැමතැනම දැන් අර ෆීල්ඩ් එකේ ගිහිලා කන සත්තු නම් ඒගොල්ලන් hoop trimming problems ආකුයි. මොකද ඒගොල්ලෝ ඇවිදින නිසා මේ පොළව මත ටච් වීමත් එක්ක ඒව ගෙවෙනවා. අපේ නියපොතු වගේම තමයි අපි අර හොඳට කපලා මේව කරලා තියෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපි ඒ අතින් හැමතිස්සෙම මොන හරි වෙන වැඩක් කරනවා නම් අපි ඇඟිලි ගොඩක් යූස් කරලා කරන වැඩ තියෙනවා නම් right ඒ නියපොතු හැමතිස්සෙම ගෙවෙන්න පටන්. ඒ වගේ මේගොල්ලන්ගේ ගෙවීමකට ලක් කරන ඇවිදිනකොට. But since they are inside the housing system, they do not have lots of space to walk around. They are just staying in one particular place. So what times they have food problems there, right? Sometimes lack of exercise may lead to kind of stiff legs. කකුල් නිකන් හයි වෙනවා. ගාන වෙනවා. මොකද ඒකට exercise එකක් නෑ. ඔය ගිය තුట్లా ඉන්න. So those kind of things are the basic disadvantages, right? So when we come to the housing systems, right? So we can arrange them in different ways, right? Maybe in a single row, or maybe double row, maybe head to head or tail to tail. I can show you one or two. This is kind of a single row housing system. Single row එකක් වගේ. එක පැත්තකට විතරයි housing system එකේ තියෙන සම්පූර්ණ ගේකින් භාගයක් වගේ පැත්තක් තියෙනවා. Right? This is called double row. අරකෙම කෑලි දෙකක් එකතු කරලා වගේ. දැන් මේක එක කෑල්ලයි තියෙන්නේ. මේකේ ඔයගලන්ට පේනවා කෑලි දෙකක් තියෙනවා, right? Animals are kept over here. Animals are kept over here. This is called the central alley. මේක තමයි අර මැද තියෙන alley එක. මේක ඇතුලේ තමයි ඇවිදගෙන යන්නේ ඔය farmers ලා, visitors ලා ඒ ඔක්කොම කරන්නේ මෙන්න මේක හරහා ඇවිදගෙන ගිහින්, right? This is kind of an example for such kind of a arrangement. So you can see this one over here, right? So this is the central alley over here. So these are the animals, right? So they are in a tie-up system. ගේ ඇතුලේ ඉන්නේ එළියට යන්න අවස්ථාවක් දෙන්නේ. Tie-up system, and they are in a kind of a tail to tail. ඒ tail to tail කියන්නේ ඒක මෙතන මම කිව්ව systems දෙකක් තියෙනවා. Tail to tail system and head to head system. Tail to tail system means their backside are facing each other. Their faces facing outside. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ මේ අපි කියන්නේ මේ පස්සාගා back quarters ඒවා තියෙනවා එක එකට face කරලා. දැන් මෙයාගෙත් එහෙමයි මේ level එකෙත් එහෙමයි. ඒකල ඔළුව තියෙන්නේ එළියට වෙන්න. So then there are some advantages and disadvantages of such kind of a situation. But here the main advantage is when you are doing the milking process, so you can access both the rows at the same time. The milk කර එනකොට පොඩි portable milking machine එකකින් වගේ මේ පැත්ත සත්තු දෙගොල්ලම එකපාර access කරන්න පුළුවන් ඕගොල්ලන්ට කිසි කාර්යයක් නැහැ. හැබැයි කෑම දෙනකොට you have to have two separate rows for the feeding purpose. මොකද කෑම තියෙන්නේ මේ එක්ක මේ පැත්තේ එක්ක මේගොල්ලන්ගේ මේ පැත්තේ. ඔළුව තියෙන එළියට මුහුණලානේ. අතුලේ හැබැයි milking process එක කිසි කාර්යයක් නැතුව මෙතන කරගෙන යන්න පුළුවන් එක central role එකක් තියෙන නිසා. Right? The same thing I have mentioned here, the wide middle alley makes kind of a cleaning process, milking process very easy because all the fecal matters and urine are collected over here, right? Milking කරන්න පුළුවන් මේ මැදේ ඉඳලා ඒ අමතරව මේ fecal matters හැමදේම collect වෙන්නේ මේ මැදට, right? ඒතර ඒ ඔක්කොම clean කරන්නත් ලේසි, right? And also the animals are facing outside. මේ සත්තු එළියට තමයි ඔළුව දාගෙන ඉන්නේ. ඒතකොට අර respiratory diseases එහෙම එකිනෙකාට spread වෙන්න තියෙන chance එක ටිකක් අඩුයි. මොකද ඒගොල්ලෝ එළියට මුහුණලා තියෙන්නේ. They will be getting a very good ventilation, right? හොඳ ventilation එකක් ඒගොල්ලන් හම්බ වෙනවා. මොකද මේගොල්ලෝ එළියට face කරලා ඉන්න නිසා, right? සහ මේ diseases spread වෙන්න තියෙන chance එක ටිකක් අඩුයි. So these things I already kind of discussed over here, right? And also since animals are facing their backside together, right? We can easily detect their heat signs, parturition signs, any diseases in the backside of the animal. ඉන්නකොට සතාගේ අර අපි කියන heat signs ටික, right? ඊට අමතරව ඔයාගේ මොනවද අපි කියන්නේ parturition එයාගේ පැටියෙක් හම්බෙන්න ඉන්න එක ඒ මොනවද signs කියන්නේ. ඒ ඔක්කොම සහ අනිත් බාහිර backwater එක පැත්තට වෙන්න තියෙන diseases ඔක්කොම conditions හැමදේම අපිට අඩ ඒක, right? Any issues with the udder, everything very easily can be checked by one person who is kind of walking through this central alley, right? Then head-to-head system. Head-to-head system means animals are facing each other, right? Head-to-head system again, they are facing each other, right? So they kind of seeing other animals on the other side of the house or the fence, right? The one of the best support of this kind of a system is since they are kind of facing each other together, and whatever the sunlight, right, is coming from the side walls of the housing systems, right? Really හොඳට හම්බෙන්නේ. ඒ හම්බෙනකොට they can easily be dried off and disinfected the back or the hind quarter of these animals. මේ සත්තුන්ගේ hind quarter එක ගොඩාක් හොඳට එතකොට disinfect වීමේ හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා. මොකද එයාලගේ back side එක face කරන්නේ එළියට. his head එක නෙමෙයි back එක. එතකොට එළියෙන් එන අවුව කියන්නේ sun rays නැත්නම් solar radiation directly kind of contact with the back side of these animals, right? So then it will eventually kind of disinfect these animals backside, including the udder, vagina or the vulva area, or even the rectum, the tail area, and everything will be kind of disinfected and will be dried very easy. But these are facing together. They are facing together. These are very close animals, but here you can see still they are facing together. Here the main thing is you can have only one central alley just to support the feeding process. මේ එක මැද alley එකේ යන ගමන් මේ දෙපැත්තටම කැම දීමේ හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා. හොඳට observe කරලා බලන්න පුළුවන් මේ සත්තු හොඳට කැම කනවද, මොනවාරි issue එකක් තියෙනවද, front side එකේ මොනවාරි issue එකක් තියෙනවද කියන එක හොඳට cleanly බලන්න පුළුවන් අවස්ථාවක් තියෙනවා. But you have to have two separate areas for the collection of fecal matter as well as for the milking purposes. Harvesting වලදී ඔයගොල්ලන්ට පේනවා මේ පිටිපස්සේ මේ පැත්තේ මේ සතුන් වෙනවා. දැන් මේ පැත්තෙන් තමයි මේ සතුන්ගේ අපද්‍රව්‍ය එකතු කරගන්න පුළුවන්. අනිත් සතුන්ගේව අර පැත්තේ එකතු කරගන්න පුළුවන්. මේගොල්ලන්ගෙත් එහෙම තමයි. මේ පැත්තේ තමයි එකතු කරගන්න පුළුවන්. මේ පැත්තෙන් පුළුවන්. දෙපැත්තක් තියෙනවා. පැති දෙකකින් අපිට use කරන්න වෙනවා urine fecal matter එකතු කරන්න. And also we have to use the same pathway just to kind of do the harvesting of milk. හොඳට ඔයගලන්ට වෙනස පේනවා ඇති මෙන්න මේ පින්තූරෙත් එක්ක, right? මේකෙදි only one මේ alley එකෙන් පුළුවන් දෙපැත්තම manage කරගන්න fecal matter and urine සහ harvesting process. But under this situation, right, you can see you have to have two gutters. කාම් දෙකක් දෙපැත්තෙන් තියෙන්න ඕනේ මේවා එකතු කරගන්න fecal matter සහ milking process එකට. Separately we have to access through two different pathways or two different lines. But the feeding is very easy under this situation, and there is a risk of spreading diseases, respiratory diseases from one animal to another animal because they are facing each other. ඒගොල්ලෝ එකිනෙකට මූණ බලන්නේ එතෙන්දි පොඩි chance එකක් තියෙනවා diseases spread වෙන්න විශේෂයෙන් respiratory associated diseases, right? The another type is called loose housing systems. Loose housing systems means animals are just loose. They are not tied up. හරි ඉස්සෙල්ලා ඒ වගේ tie කරලා නැහැ. ඉස්සෙල්ලා මේවා ඒගොල්ලෝ confine කරලා තියෙන යම් මේ ඕගොල්ලන්ට පේන ඇති මෙතන ලණු දාලා තියෙනවා. කඹ දාලා තියෙනවා බෙල්ල. ඒගොල්ලෝ මේවට ගැට ගහලා තියෙන්නේ. මේ යට තියෙන බිම තියෙන වෙනම හූක් එකක් හයි කරලා. ඒ හූක් එකට ගැට ගහලා තියෙනවා. ඒතර ඒ සත්තුන්ට එහා මෙහා යෑමේ හැකියාවක් මෙතන අවස්ථාව එන්නේ නැහැ. ඔතනම ඉඳගෙන ඔතන වාඩිලා නැගිටින එක විතරයි කරන්නේ. අර ඉස්සෙල්ලාගේ disadvantage තමයි මේ සතා නැගිටිනකොට වාඩිනකොට හරි මේ සතාගේ teats මෙහෙම තිබ්බොත් එහෙම පෑගීමේ chance එකක් තියෙනවා. Right? But loose housing system එක, right? It is very convenient, right? Which is very convenient, spacious. Animals can walk here and there inside the housing systems, right? No any kind of a major issues, limitations like we had for the other ones, because these are kind of a free movement animal, right? So we can provide a better welfare, right? And some exercise for these animals, right? It's not hoop trimming වගේ ප්‍රශ්න එච්චරම එන්නේ නැහැ, right? And also we can easily detect the heat signs. Within the heat signs හොඳට බලන්න පුළුවන් මොකද මේ animal ලා free නේ. ඒ සත්තු එකිනෙකාගේ ඇඟ උඩ නගින්න යනවද? එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒ සත්තු අර ඒ වගේ අර මේ behavioral signs පෙන්නනවද? Right? ඒවා හොඳට බලන්න පුළුවන් මේ වගේ situation එකක. Right? So හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න මොනවද වෙනස්කම් කියලා මේගොල්ලන් දෙන මේ houses systems වලදී, right? කොහොමද house මොකක්ද විශේෂත්වය දැන් tie up housing system එක ගන්න ඒකේ තියෙන කොටස් දෙක. එකක් තමයි head to head, tail to tail. Loose housing system එකක් ගත්තොත් මොනවද තියෙන advantage, මොනවද තියෙන disadvantage. ඒ වගේ හැමදේම හොඳට මේ මතක තියාගන්න. So when we kind of develop a house, right? There are some basic components in a house, right? Even in our houses, when we construct a house, right? We kind of seek and try to assure, right? Some basic components, right? What is the type of bricks that we are going to use? How many number of windows? How many number of doors available? Number of bathrooms? Number of rooms? Kind of bedrooms, master bedrooms, right? Attached bathrooms, right? Storage rooms, living room, TV room, kitchen, right? Likewise, right? So there are kind of a components we have to look on these animal houses as well. Right? First, we have to kind of look at the floor. It should be easily kind of a clean and should be very dry, right? And we can use some concrete or cement, right? Just to kind of construct the floor of the houses, and we should construct them in a kind of a slope direction just to kind of collect and clean the excreta produced inside the farmhouses, right? The walls, right? They should be very smooth, right? And no any kind of protruding materials. Protruding කියලා කියන්නේ නිකන් අර උල් කෑලි, ඇන කෑලි, නැත්නම් concrete කෑලි, right? So no any kind of damages, right, to the animals. And the wall corners අපි කියන්නේ බිත්ති එකිනෙකට හමු වෙන තැන් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට හදන්න පුළුවන් නම් හොඳයි circular shape එක. දැන් කොටු වලට වඩා හදනවට වඩා. So then we can easily clean them, right? And better air circulation, better light and everything. So walls should be constructed on kind of focusing on those factors. Then the roof, right? What are the type of materials that we are going to use for the roof of these animals, right? Whether it is natural leaves like kachan leaves, or asbestos, or tiles, right? Or corrugated iron sheets. So what are the things that we are going to use? So based on the normal temperature, ambient temperature, environmental conditions, we can select the best raw material can be used for roof of these animals, right? Then the manger. Manger means what is the kind of areas just to kind of provide the feed for these animals. මැංගර්ස් කියලා කියන්නේ පොඩි නිකන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ ගිහිල්ලා බැලුවොත් තේරෙනවා ඔය අබේවල මුස්ලිම් ෆාම් එක තමයි හොඳම උදාහරණය. ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ වෙනම තියෙනවා ඔය හවුසින් සිස්ටම් එකක් ඇතුලේ කෑම දෙන්න පොඩි කොටුවක්. right? So which will reduce feed wastage. සිමෙන්තියෙම වගේ හදලා කොන්ක්‍රීට් වලින් හදපු කෑම දෙන කොටස් තියෙනවා අතුලේ. ඒ සත්තු ඉන්න ගාන බලලා තමයි ඒගොල්ලෝ ඒක මේ හදන්නේ. නැත්නම් ඒක සතෙක් නම් ඒ සතට උපන මිනිමම් ස්පේස් එකත් එක්ක ඒගොල්ලෝ හදනවා. right? So that is just to kind of prevent the feed wastage of these farming or whatever the farming managements, right? Then the alleys, right? Alleys means we can have a kind of a central alley. අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා දැක්කා වගේ මැදින් ඇතුළට එන්න පුළුවන් central alley එකක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Then we have the gutters, right? Gutters තියෙන්න ඕනේ just to kind of remove whatever the waste generated or water that we use to clean these animals. So there should be kind of alleys and the gutters just to kind of remove these waste materials as well as easy to access, right? And we should have better alleys, right? Alley කියලා කියන්නේ alley එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ අර මැද තියෙන central walk path එක. ඒක තමයි වාහනයක් අරන් ගිහලා දෙපැත්තට head to head එක ගන්නවා. එක දෙපැත්තට කෑම දාගෙන යනවා. එක මේ කරන තියෙන මැද තියෙන ස්පේස් එක ගන්න මැදට කෑම දාගෙන යනවා. tail fill system එක ගන්න අනිත් පැත්ත දෙපැත්තටම වෙනම feeding මේ mangoes තියෙනවනේ ඒවට කෑම දාගෙන යනවා. ඒ අනිත් පැත්ත slope වෙන්න හදන්න ඕනේ. ඒකට urine water fecal matter ඔක්කොම clean කරලා අයින් කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙන විදිහට, right? And then the location of these farms, right? Or the areas that we can select to construct a kind of a housing system or dairy farm, right? First, we will look at the topography and the drainage. අපි කොහේ හරි soil එකක් හොයාගත්තට පස්සේ location එකක් හොයාගත්තට පස්සේ අපි බලන්න ඕනේ මොනවද අපි ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් බලන්න ඕන factors. ගියක් හදන්න මේ සත්තුන්ට, right? මේ සත්තුන්ගේ හදලා දෙන්න මොනවද අපි බලන factors. So what are the things that we usually consider, right? The first one is the topography and drainage, right? So whether it is a elevation, the higher elevation, and what is the drainage condition? Are there any kind of a waterlogging condition, right? Landslides, right? Any kind of a location which is very close to the, what do you call, any kind of a farming system or whatever the system creating some hazardous gases or whatever the odors, right? So we have to check on those things first, right? Then the soil type, right? It should be very fertile soil, right? Because we have to cultivate some grasses, feeds for these animals, grasses, corn, right? Or maybe any other kind of a feeding materials like legume types, right? So we should have kind of a very good, well, kind of a hydrated soil type with very good fertility just to support these kind of a feed cultivation, right? And it should be kind of protected from the sunlight, right? And windy, right? If it is too much of wind surrounding area. So we should have to be considered whether we are going to construct the housing systems is kind of a particular selected location, right? Then the access, whether we have very better or very good access to the building, right? And access to the farm, whether we have kind of a proper infrastructure, road facility with sufficient space and drainage just to access the farm and just to kind of transport whatever the goods available needed for these farm management, right? Then the durability, attractiveness, right? The scenic view, aesthetic value, right? So that's why we go to Nuwara and Ambeville and New Zealand farms, because they are also in a location which kind of a aesthetic value. We have very good scenery, right? Scenic view, very good for photographs, kind of create some memories, right? And also the durability, how long we can keep them, right? The level of strength that we usually need for these buildings, right? To kind of having a long shelf or the long lasting ability of these building structures. The water supply, water is very essential. The water supply should be there. It should be very clean, cheap, and high quality, right? The labor, the support of labor, whether we can find laborers, enough laborers in the environment, right? Or in the kind of a supporting kind of a nearby areas, right? They should be very honest and economic, which means low wages or average wages, right? And regular supply, right? The surroundings, right? Are there any predatory animals, any kind of wild animal? The areas kind of infected with any kind of diseases, right? Whatever the kind of uh, what do you call any kind of uh, enemies or whatever threats to the farms or the animals, right? In addition, inside the farms, what do you call the entrance gates and what do you call other areas with any kind of a damaging or threatening structures are there, right? Any nails like thing, right? The flow should be very smooth in finish, right? And a very good marketing system. We should have very good market, right? අපි ගයක් හදද්දී ඔයගේ සත්තුන්ට අපි හදලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ මේ කිසිම මාකට් එකක් නැති තැනක. අපි හදන ප්‍රොඩක්ට් එක විකුණ ගන්න තැනක් තියෙනවා, right? We should have a very good market for whatever the products that we kind of are going to produce within the farm. And electricity supply, you know, these days it is very expensive, right? So are there any alternative supply, solar radiation, whatever the solar power, or maybe wind power? ඔයගොල්ලෝ ගිහිල්ලා තියෙනවා නම් අනුරෙලි ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැකලා ඇති මේ අම්බේවල පාම් ඉරන පාරේ wind wheels ගොඩාක් තියෙනවා, right? Turbines, right? So they will generate lots of what do you call power that can be used for their day-to-day activities within the farms, right? So these kind of factors, right? Electricity supply should be reliable and continuous supply. Then what are the other factors, right? So feed storage, hay stacks, silos, manure, kind of waste management pits, right? So they should be there just to kind of manage them in an efficient manner under those circumstances, right? So those are the basic things that I kind of wanted to discuss under the dairy cattle management, right?
Recording stopped.
So those are the basic things that I kind of wanted to discuss regarding dairy cattle, right? Or me about whether the lecture notes will be uploaded. Yes, of course I will. I already uploaded whatever the lecture notes that we discussed last week into the LMS and whatever the things that I am going to discuss. So I discussed today so far, and whatever the things I will be discussing, so will be uploaded into the LMS. But I will not be uploading any kind of what you call notes regarding the recordings, right? So I will not be uploading the recordings to the systems, not this week and the last week, and only the lecture notes will be uploaded to the system, right? Okay, so then the clean milk production. So that is the last thing that I wanted to kind of cover up today. So milk that is basically coming from these animals, right? Regardless of the type of animal. If you take cattle, dairy cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat, those are ruminant animals. So one of their major product is milk, targeting the human consumption plus whatever the young generation or whatever the offsprings they produce need to consume this milk during their initial life stages, right? So that's why we kind of are concerned about this one, because if we are kind of rearing a dairy animal, which is very kind of a compulsory to kind of produce milk by their moms, right? Just to cater the nutrient requirements of these young animals, right? So that's the main thing that we are also doing. What we do is what they produce as milk is harvested by humans, right? And use it for our purposes. So that's what generally happens, right? So when it's come to the milk, right, which is one of the excellent source for the growth of microorganisms, because it is highly nutritious substances, right? It contains lots of proteins, vitamins, minerals, and fats, right? Sugar, which means carbohydrate, which contain lots of nutrients, right? So what happens if we produce milk unhygienical conditions, right? අපි සෞඛ්‍ය ආරක්ෂිත නොවන විදියට හැදුවොත් එහෙනම් මොකද වෙන්නේ, right? Or when we handle them in careless manner, right? It can contaminate very easily, and without a doubt, right, it will lead for the spoilage of the milk. So in order to prevent this one, right, so what we have to do is we have to kind of highlight the clean milk production, right? So clean milk, basically what happens is we can obtain clean milk with several methods, right? What we can do is we can use some clean utensils, right? We can clean the udder. We can kind of avoid any kind of extra materials, kind of surrounding environment like dust, flies, any manure like urine or fecal matter, right? So then we can kind of assure, right, we are producing a very good level of milk just for the human consumption. Otherwise, which will be really kind of bad for the consumption, and we will be having low quality products, right? So what are the kind of factors influencing this quality of milk that we produce and what we kind of are handling in the process of milk production, right? So basically these animals, when we kind of think about some animals, so we have to think about these animals that they should be kind of free from any disease conditions, right? For an example, we earlier discussed about the mastitis, right? So they should be free from mastitis or maybe any other disease conditions, right? TB, tuberculosis, right? Brucellosis or whatever the kind of diseases which can be communicated to humans or maybe to other animals through milk. And free from some bacterial diseases like Salmonella, right? E. coli, Streptococcus, right? Or any viral infections, right? As like cowpox, right? FMD, like we call Mukaha Kuraroge kila අපි කියන්නේ foot and mouth disease, right? So those things should not be there in these animals if we are using them for milk production. So we have to assure the health of these animals. Then the cleaning process. So what we are going to do to assure these animals are clean, right? So we can kind of clean these animals with the routine grooming practices, brushing, and we can wash them, right? And we can wash the teats of these animals during the harvesting process, right? And we can kind of clean them and we can dry them, right? And we can avoid any dungs, mud, or bedding materials or straw may be kind of contaminated with some microorganisms and get in touch with the animals as well as whatever the products coming from these animals, right? And the environment, right? It should be very clean, right? Well ventilated. That's why I was discussing the type of houses that we require and what are the factors we consider when we are kind of developing or constructing a housing system, right? Well ventilated, light should be there, right? And the direction, right? The kind of the floor that we kind of construct should not kind of accumulated dung or whatever the cow dung or whatever the manure kind of is created from these animals, right? So that's why when I was discussing about houses, I was telling you that like we need to have kind of a housing system with a very good slope just to collect this manure and urine without any kind of an issue and safely removal from the housing systems and collected into a waste treatment plant, right? So those things has to be practiced just to assure kind of a very clean milk production, right? So when we kind of consider about the type of water, we have to assure providing very good quality water, right? It should be kind of away from any kind of a contamination, specifically microorganisms, right? And also we have to kind of have clean, high quality water, right? And feeds should be free from any kind of aflatoxins, some heavy metals, right? Whatever the plant originated toxins. We have to check all these factors and try to avoid any kind of a contamination with these things with the animals, right? As well as with the milk that they produce. Utensils, what are the equipments that we use for these kind of milk production processes, right? So we have to kind of clean these things, right? All the time with disinfected, and we can use some methods to sterilize to avoid any contaminations, right? We can kind of use them and dry them and keep them in a kind of a safe place until we are using for the next steps, right? And also we have to assure them, right? Once they are kind of a milk, right? As soon as we milk them, we just take them and put them in a cool environment or refrigerated environment just to kind of minimize the growth of microorganisms inside the milk because it is very nutritious food, right? Then the milker's hygiene, right? So what are the factors the milker should follow, the guidelines should follow to avoid any kind of a contamination or just to assure the quality of clean milk production, right? So the milker should be clean. That's the first thing, right? Well washed and hands are washed, right? And free from any diseases like they should avoid sneezing, coughing, or even smoking, right? And consumption of tobacco, chewing of tobacco, right? No any kind of alcohol use during this kind of a process, right? And should be free from any kind of a disease like it can be contagious to other people like cholera, typhoid, diphtheria, TB, right? And also they should clean their hands and arms, right? And also their fingernails should be well trimmed, right? අපි කියන්නේ ඉපත හොඳට කපලා ඉන්නවනේ, right? Always they should use soap and kind of clean towels, right? Just to kind of clean by themselves, right? And also the milkers should not practice kind of a what do you call wrong milking practices, right? අපි කියන්නේ වැරදි ලෙස milk harvest කරන practices ඒගොල්ලෝ practice කරන්න හොඳයි, right? There are several methods: the hand milking methods, machine milking method, milking parlor, right? Or manual methods, right? Portable milking machine, the knuckling, right? So those things should not be kind of do in a wrong way or wrong manner, right? And we can do some works just to kind of educate the farms, right? So we can do several kind of visits to the farms, right? And we can inform them, aware them, right? Or educate them, right? So what they should do just to kind of do or produce clean milks. They should adopt, right? Good animal husbandry practices, right? And just to kind of limit any kind of a hazardous contamination, particularly microorganisms or the bacteria contamination, right? We can kind of guide them and train them, right? Just to kind of maintain a very good quality standards of milk and kind of a proper paying system, right? Higher prices, right? So then we can just kind of assure or kind of ask them just to kind of produce milk in a very good quality manner, right? So in general, when we kind of consider about the clean milk production, so this is just to show you kind of a sketch setup of milking parlor or kind of a milking factory, right? So basically, if we practice high or good quality practices, right, we can use the kind of a clean and whatever the kind of a good environmental practices just to kind of avoid any contaminations, right? However, normal surfaces or whatever the areas, we kind of a highly kind of a what do you call gathered ගොඩක් අර මිනිස්සු වැඩිපුර ගැවසෙන තැන් farm එකක හරි එහෙම නැත්නම් factory එක හරි වැඩිපුර handling වෙන තැන්, right? The areas where kind of a contribute or kind of a joining for kind of a gathering more and more people and more other kind of active areas, right? The other places which will contribute significantly for the total contamination process of milk we are produced in a farm, right? So when we kind of consider about the buildings, so that's why we already discussed about the buildings and how we are kind of constructing housing systems. You can just go through them and read them, and don't worry about whatever the measurements, right? The height, width, length. So those are not that much important for you, but just go through them. I already discussed them, right? So when we how we are kind of have the houses, what are the access point, right? So there should be some access point, entry and exit point, and the people should not be allowed to go everywhere they want inside the farm. If you go to the Ambivela farm, again, New Zealand, right? So you have some entry points, right? And some access points. So you are not close to the animals, right? ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැන් අලුතෙන් හදලා තියෙන farm එකට ගියා නම් Ambivela New Zealand farm එකේ. ඔයගොල්ලෝ ගිහිල්ලා ඇති මං හිතන්නේ මෙතන ඔක්කොම වගේ. එතන බලන්න පුළුවන් අපිට ලේසියෙන් සත්තු ළඟට යන්න බෑ. But still we can see them properly, clearly, in a very good distance, right? All the practices can be seen very carefully, no any issues, right? But still you can see it, right? But no any close contact with the animal. So that's how you should develop or construct the buildings, right? Still you have the access to the buildings, but you are not close to the animal. So then there is less chance of spreading any diseases, any kind of hazardous contaminations, right? So we can kind of avoid and minimize those kind of things, right? And when you kind of use different utensils, right? You can use stainless steel or whatever the aluminium, right? Originated utensils, right? So then it will kind of free from any kind of what do you call decaying, right? අපි කියන්නේ දැන් අර මලකඩ කාලා එහෙම සවුත් වීමක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ. එතකොට අපි stainless steel හරි aluminium වගේ use කරොත් එහෙමනේ. And if you use any kind of equipments, the surfaces of those equipments should be free from any kind of a damaging, kind of threatening pieces, right? Rough spots, right? Pits, so those things kind of like a non-corrosive surfaces should be there, right? So those things kind of will assure the clean milk production process, right? So this is just kind of guideline how you should wash your hands, right, before you entering this kind of a plant or before you go for milking the cows, right? I will show you kind of a picture that give me a second. Right, so this is kind of a manual milking process, right? You might have seen this because I just wanted to show you again, right? So you can see this person, this is the milker, right? Who is milking, right? So you can see this is kind of a stainless steel kind of a bucket, but still you can see what are the other unhygienic places inside this kind of a location, right? So you can see the udder is not well cleaned over here, right? So udder is not well clean, right? Maybe he washed his hand, but I don't know. We don't know, right? But the floor, you can see floor is also kind of a muddy floor, right? So there is high kind of a chance of contamination, right? And anyway, this one is stainless steel, but I believe they have kind of a cleaned it before kind of using that for the milk kind of harvesting using this method, right? So those are kind of factors we have to consider. නැත්නම් හිතලා බලන්න මේ සතාගේ අඩ එක අපි ක්ලීන් කරලා තිබ්බේ නැත්නම් මේ සතාගේ පේනවනේ මඩ ගතියක් තියෙනවා පොඩි ඩර්ටි ගතියක් ඒ ඔක්කොම මේ මිල්ක් එකට වැටෙන්න පුළුවන්. And also you have to clean the teats. මොකද teats තමයි අපි ගොඩක් කලකට අල්ලන්නේ milking process එකේදී, right? So we have to kind of consider those factors, otherwise we cannot assure a clean milk production process, right? So this is the drinking of milk by young calf, right? So we should not allow them to drink milk before we are doing the milking process, right? අපි milking කරන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා මෙයාට බොන්න දුන්නොත් වෙන්නේ මෙයා කිරිටි ඔක්කොම බීලා දාන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට අපිට ඕන කරන milk ප්‍රමාණය හොයා ගන්න බැරි වෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? So that's the main things we have to consider, and we have to clean before we start the milking process. So that's the main thing, right? The milker we should kind of clean whatever the teats and the udder of these animals just to assure the clean milk production, right? So I will show you a milking machine as well, right? Okay, so these are the portable milking machines, right? So this is kind of a what do you call machine milking unit. So this is a machine milking, right? So you can see the cow is over here and it is kind of connected to the udder, right? Then all the milk will come through these tubes and will go through these tubes and enter into a separate machine, right? So these are the kind of milking machines that they usually use for the milking purposes, right? These are the portable ones, portable milking machines. But the thing is, in order to assure the clean milk production, you have to use these kind of utensils like stainless steel utensils, and these kind of cups also kind of in stainless steel. And also, once you are done with the milking, you have to clean these equipments properly. අන්න ඒක තමයි වැදගත් වෙන්නේ. මේ හැම equipment එකම properly clean කරන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම නැත්නම් වෙන්නේ contaminated milk හරි මොනවා හරි තිබ්බොත් මේව හරියට clean වෙන්නේ නැතුව එතනින් පස්සේ milk ඔක්කොම damage වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් discard කරලා දාන්න වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද මේ tubes and bottom හැමදේම අපිට හරියට clean කරලා ගන්න වෙනවා. හොඳටම පිරිසිදු කරන්න වෙනවා. Otherwise we will be in danger in producing some kind of a decayed or deteriorated milk, right? So this is the same machine, the portable one, right? This is a stainless steel machine, right? So the milk will be collected through these cups, right? මේ තියෙන teats වලට දාන cup එක. දැන් අපි අත use කරනවා වෙනකොට අපිට මේ cups use කරලා අපිට මේ milk එක process එක පැහැදිලි check කරගන්න පුළුවන්. This is kind of a same thing, right? The milking machine, right? The milking parlor also with the same setup, right? So these are the cups, teat cups, right? මේවා තමයි teat එකට high කරන්න මේ තියෙන මෙන්න මේ cup එක, right? So this is the container that collect milk coming through this machine, the tubes, right? So that is cups, right? That's yeah. That's what I wanted to highlight over there, right? Right? So then this is how we kind of clean our hands, right? So we already kind of went through that one, right? So there are some disinfectants or maybe kind of a soap or any kind of a liquid soap just to kind of clean our hands before we enter into the milking parlor, or maybe just enter into the location where we usually practice the milking. So then how we can kind of clean, we can produce clean milk for the human consumption. So water supply, what should be there all the time, right? So it should be uninterrupted, not contaminated, right? So we have to check every time. And chlorine water, it should be very minimum, right? Should not be chlorinated water, right? Should be portable and should kind of have very easy access and not kind of a hard water. Again, cool water should not be like that, right? And always we have to test through the laboratory site. Whatever the milk we collect, we have to test, right? Whether we have the fat percentage, water percentage, protein, sugar level, ash level, right? In addition, we have to check for any kind of a material that we are using for any kind of a contamination time to time. සමහරවිට machines උපකරණ අපි බලන්න ඕනේ මේවා මොනවාරි contaminations තියෙනවද කියලා. අපි ගොඩක් වෙලාවට කරන්නේ ඉතින් අර පොඩ්ඩක් swabs වගේ අරගෙන ඒක හැමතැනම කරන්නේ නැහැ, right? Not all the places are doing these kind of practices, but the locations where we have the technology, right? The people with the experts, they usually check at least a few times, targeted times, they check any suspected areas for any contamination, right? The air quality, right? Everything should be there, right? We have kind of a check on those factors, right? So how we are going to clean those equipments, right? So those things are given here, right? Those are very simple things to understand, right? So very easily we can clean them using very clean, pure water, right? So at least rinsing with water is more beneficial than doing nothing, right? So that's the best thing, right? අපි සමහරලාට මුකුත් නොකර ඉන්නවට වඩා හොඳ clean water වලින් හොඳට flush out කරලා ගන්න. ඒක හැම machine එකක්ම හැම උපකරණයක්ම අපි use කරන එක ඉතාමත්ම වැදගත් වෙනවා clean milk production කියන concept එක, right? Otherwise milk will kind of contaminated with microorganisms and with other hazardous compounds, and it will kind of lead to any kind of a threat to the human health at the end of the day, right? Yes. Okay. So that's what, yeah, you don't need to discuss these things. I will share the whatever the slides you may need to kind of understand, go through your exams, right? But here I wanted to highlight what are the factors we should consider when we are thinking of clean milk production, right? අපි පිරිසුදු නැත්නම් contamination අඩු කිරි නිෂ්පාදනයේදී අපි වැදගත් වෙන කරුණු මොනවද කියන්නේ. Main thing is we have to assure the cleanliness, right? That's the best thing of the people who are involved, animals who are involved, the location and the equipments that we are using, right? We have to be healthy first. Animal have to be kind of a healthier animals, right? And then the other factors such as utensils and the environment, air quality, water quality, and other factors are matters just to assure overall quality milk production, right? Okay, so what I kind of wanted to discuss, right, was this at the end of the day, right?
Recording
So-
stopped.
So if you have any questions, actually we can discuss, right? So what we kind